Jon was 5 when the whispers first reached him. He was too young to shape them into comprehension, too small to know what they truly meant, but there was something in the timbre of those hushed voices that made the hairs on his arms stand up. He heard them outside his sleeping quarters at Winterfell, behind stone walls and in echoing corridors, words muttered by travelers, rumors that scurried away like mice the moment light was shone upon them. They spoke of a boy, a chosen one, a champion reborn in mortal flesh. He never imagined the whispers might be about him. In those days, Jon was only a bastard in the eyes of the world, the son of Lord Eddard Stark and an unknown mother. He knew no grand destiny, he knew only that he was different. The older he grew, the more acutely he felt the gap. Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon were all official scions of House Stark, but Jon carried the weight of the label that set him apart. It was an invisible chain around his neck, forging a distance that his father's kindness could not entirely close. Even so, he had no illusions of grandeur. He dreamed of knighthood perhaps, or maybe joining the Night's Watch, but never once did he dream of anything that could shake the foundations of the entire realm. The year he turned 12, the Red Priest came. His name was Mazo, or so he called himself, and his robes were a flaming red in color, the hue of a roaring blaze, lined with gold thread. He arrived on horseback with an acolyte in tow, braving the fierce winds of the north and the suspicious glares of the guards at Winterfell's gate. The rumor was that he brought messages from across the narrow sea, but few welcomed him. He asked to see the boy. There had been many boys in Winterfell, stable hands, squires, wards, but the Red Priest's eyes seemed to pierce the stone walls and find Jon no matter how he tried to remain unseen. He was polite when he asked for an audience with Eddard Stark. Polite, but insistent. Jon remembered the great hall that day, how cold it was despite the roaring fire, how the smell of incense wafted from the Red Priest's garments. Eddard Stark's usually stern face was carved with deeper lines, suspicious of this foreigner in fiery robes. The Red Priest spoke of prophecy, a child of ice and fire, and how the flame of the Lord of Light had guided him here. It sounded like nonsense to Jon then, an extravagant tale from Essos. But the priest turned to look at Jon with such intensity that he felt his heart hammer in his chest. Mazo talked about a sword called Lightbringer, a champion called Azor Ahai who would save the world from darkness. Ned Stark listened with eyes that betrayed no emotion, but he cast a protective glance at Jon all the same. In the end, Eddard Stark's voice was quiet but firm. He remains here with his family, he said. And that might have been the end of it, another passing oddity in Jon's life, had the Red Priest not reappeared in the dead of night a moon's turn later. Jon woke that night to find him standing in the corridor just outside his chamber. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by a single torch in the priest's hand. Mazo said no words of threat, he merely beckoned Jon to follow. An inexplicable curiosity tugged at Jon, an urge he could not name. He followed the priest through winding halls, out into the godwood. Snow had fallen in the courtyard, dusting the world in ghostly white. The weirwood's face glistened with fresh moisture, tears of ice. Mazo knelt before it, placed a hand on the bone-white trunk, and prayed. Jon stood behind him, trembling with cold and a strange anticipation. "You have felt it, haven't you?" Mazo said, eyes closed. Jon said nothing. He didn't know what he had felt. "The cold draws around you, but you have a warmth within," the priest continued. A spark waiting to become a flame. He rose to his feet, turning to face Jon. "Let me see your hand." Jon hesitated. He raised one hand uncertainly, and before he could protest, Mazo wrapped his own slender fingers around it. Jon felt something then, a warmth, building behind his eyes, in his chest, and coursing through his veins. For the briefest moment, the world around him seemed to darken, and the Red Priest's eyes glowed with an inner fire. Then it was gone, as if it had never been. "You were touched by light," Mazo whispered, voice trembling. "I have crossed the sea for you." At that moment, the snow-laden branches overhead creaked, sending a flurry of white powder swirling down. Jon didn't understand. He only knew that an odd emptiness spread through him when the Red Priest released his hand, and that emptiness yearned to be filled again. Mazo left Winterfell at dawn, escorted from the gates by Ned Stark's men. Jon watched from a high window, feeling a curious pang of loss, as if some slender thread between him and the priest had been severed too soon. He didn't know that the next time he saw the man, it would be far from Winterfell and under far more extraordinary circumstances. For years, life continued almost as usual. Jon honed his swordsmanship under the watchful eye of Ser Roderick Castle. He clashed wooden practice swords with Robb until both of them grew exhausted and bruised. He tried to avoid Sansa's polite rejections of his presence and teased Arya for her wildness, simultaneously understanding her better than he ever did Sansa. As time passed, the memory of the Red Priest faded, along with the bizarre notion that Jon might be the subject of some prophecy. He was a bastard boy in Winterfell, and the realm was beginning to stir with tensions that no one could fully name. Whispers of King Robert's failing health and new political entanglements in King's Landing spread. The Targaryens remained in exile across the sea, broken in power since the rebellion, or so everyone believed. Yet the realm was uneasy. Ned Stark left for King's Landing, taking his daughters with him, and Jon prepared to journey to the Wall to join the Night's Watch, believing that would be his fate. He didn't realize that fate had other ideas. On the night before Jon was to leave Winterfell, he found a letter waiting on his bunk, sealed with red wax in the shape of a flaming heart. The sight jolted him awake, memories of the priest's eyes burning behind his lids. He broke the seal with trembling fingers, scanning words written in flowing script. It was an entreaty, a request that he meet someone at the edge of the Wolfswood by moonrise. Jon was torn. He was supposed to ride out with his uncle Benjen at dawn toward the Wall, to begin a life of duty. Yet the letter's presence made his heart pound in a peculiar way. Against his better judgment, knowing it could be some trap or trick, he followed the instructions that night. He crept out of the castle, avoiding the guards, and made his way to the Wolfswood. At the edge of the trees he found a small camp. A single tent glowed with lamplight, and a horse cropped at the sparse grass. As Jon approached, the tent flap parted, revealing Mazo again, unchanged except for an expression of even greater urgency. Before Jon could speak, the priest made a gesture, beckoning him near the fire. Another figure emerged, an acolyte with shorn hair and wide eyes, a woman who introduced herself simply as Ira. "Jon Snow," the priest began, his voice soft in the hush of the midnight woods. "I would speak plainly now. You are Azor Ahai reborn. The Lord of Light has shown us visions. We have walked through nightmares and discovered them to be prophecies guiding us here." Jon swallowed. "I'm no one," he said automatically. "Only a bastard." The priest's lips curved into a wistful smile. In the ancient tales, the chosen ones are often born in obscurity. Yet the flames do not lie. The realm stands on the brink of great chaos. Darkness gathers beyond the Wall. Mazo's eyes flickered with a kind of holy fire, and only one can stand against it. Jon wanted to protest, to laugh, to call the man a mad priest. But something about the words made his stomach twist with a sense of both fear and possibility. The memory of that warmth in his chest, that brief flicker of something powerful, returned to him. "I'm to join the Night's Watch," Jon said. "I made my decision. And you can still fulfill your duty to the realm," the priest replied. "But not by binding yourself to black robes and an oath that will bury your name. There is a greater path for you. Come with us. Let us guide you to safety. Let us show you the truth of your heritage, your destiny." The wind through the pines made a hollow sound. Jon stood in silence, thinking of Lord Stark's serious face, of his friend Robb, of his uncle Benjen's invitation. But a part of him knew that if there was any truth to these prophecies, ignoring them could be disastrous. He couldn't shake the feeling that the world, as he knew it, was about to break open. "Where would we go?" Jon asked, his voice catching. "East," said the priest. "Across the narrow sea where the temples of the Lord of Light stand strong. You will be out of reach of those who would use you for their own ends. Darkness moves in Westeros. Some might call it war, I call it the stirrings of the Great Other. If you remain here, you risk being swept up and destroyed before you ever come into your power." Jon's heart pounded. He looked back the way he'd come, toward Winterfell's distant walls, hidden in the darkness. He pictured the life he was leaving behind, a quiet, unremarkable life overshadowed by the name Snow. The thirst for belonging warred with a longing for significance, for truth. In that moment, the memory of the Red Priest's earlier visit flared bright. He recalled the feeling of warmth, of possibility. Could it be that he truly carried some shard of fate? He made his choice. They rode out that night, winding through the Wolfswood until they reached the King's Road under starlight. The journey was swift and secretive. Jon told no one. He left behind only a hastily scrawled message apologizing to his father, though he knew it would cause Lord Stark distress. Guilt gnawed at him, but something more powerful and unyielding draw led him onward. They traveled south, avoiding major towns, and boarded a ship at White Harbor bound for Braavos under a false name. Jon had never left Westeros before. The tumult of the sea and the strangeness of the foreign ports jarred him, yet there was also a curious thrill in it all. He was stepping into a new world, propelled by a destiny he still could barely fathom. It was in Braavos, in a hidden temple of the Lord of Light, that Jon began to learn what it meant to be Azor Ahai reborn, or at least, what the Red Priests believed it meant. He was introduced to texts as old as the Valyrian Freehold, scrolls that spoke of the long night, of a hero who forged a blade in living fire, driving back the shadows. Priests and priestesses crowded around him, some in silent awe, others with inquisitive stares as if he were a specimen to be studied. Ira became his constant companion and guide, patient and stern by turns. She explained the rites of the faith, the rituals of fire, the teachings that said the great other lurked, waiting to unleash an endless darkness upon the living. Mazo was both tutor and protector. Under his supervision, Jon spent long nights in prayer and meditation before braziers blazing with arcane oils. The priests recited incantations extolling the power of Lawler, the Lord of Light, the Heart of Fire, the God of Flame and Shadow. At times, Jon felt foolish, kneeling before flames that licked at the night air. But then, at unexpected moments, he would feel a rush of heat surge through his veins, hear a strange whisper that seemed to emanate from the dancing embers. He could neither name nor deny it. "You must embrace it," Mazo told him time and again, "for it is the power that will protect us all. The darkness beyond the wall grows and the great war will come sooner than the realm is ready." Jon worried about his family. He heard fragments of news from Westeros, whispers that King Robert Baratheon had died in a suspicious hunting accident, that House Stark and House Lannister were at each other's throats, that Robb Stark was calling banners in the north. It seemed the War of the Five Kings was blossoming in blood and treachery, just as Mazo had predicted. Yet the priests urged Jon to remain hidden, to focus on understanding himself. "If you return to Westeros now," they warned, "you be swallowed by the chaos. You are not yet prepared, and there are those who would see you dead." Jon didn't argue. He could feel a stirring in the air, as if some cosmic scale was tilting. He dreamt of Winterfell's courtyards consumed in flames, dreamt of icy winds howling over the wall, of shadows moving with dreadful purpose. He woke with sweat beading on his brow, Ira's calm voice guiding him back to reality. She told him that prophecy often revealed itself in haunting fragments. "Fire shows us what might be," she would say, "but rarely do we see how to shape it." It was in that labyrinthine Braavosi temple that Jon first discovered a singular, staggering truth. He was not Ned Stark's bastard, but the secret son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. The Red Priests did not know every detail of the tale, only that the flames revealed Jon's bloodline was of dragon as well as wolf. They believed it confirmed his role as Azor Ahai, for who else could be born of ice and fire so literally as a child of Stark and Targaryen? Jon was dumbstruck. Had his father known? He must have, Jon reasoned. Ned Stark's honor was unshakable, and yet he had carried a secret so profound. "Robert would have killed you," Mazo explained gently, "had he known of your Targaryen blood. That is why your father swore to keep you hidden in plain sight. He saved your life." Grief and gratitude mingled within Jon until he thought he might burst. The man he called father was not his father, yet he would always be the father of Jon's heart. It changed much, but it also explained everything: the guilt in Ned Stark's eyes, the unwavering protectiveness, the hush around Jon's mother. "I wish I could speak to him," Jon whispered. But news from Westeros suggested Lord Eddard Stark was imprisoned or worse. The realm was in turmoil. "You cannot save him now," Mazo said, a note of pity in his voice. "Your destiny lies beyond one man, beyond one war. You are Azor Ahai. Embrace your blood, your power, and you will do more than save your father. You will save all of Westeros." Still, the burden felt immense. Jon felt no closer to forging a magical sword or summoning a fiery miracle. He only knew that each day, the priests subjected him to more lessons, from the lore of old Valyria to the darkest corners of the long night stories. Ira taught him how to coax the flames in the braziers to dance to his will, though at first it was only the faintest flicker. He learned not only to fight with a sword, but with cunning and confidence, learning that while knights of Westeros favored steel and tradition, he might employ the advantage of ritual and prophecy, focusing the energies he felt creeping through his blood whenever he prayed to the fire. It was halfway through that first year in Braavos that something extraordinary occurred, something that would define the course of Jon's destiny in ways none of them had foreseen. A rumor reached Mazo's ears that in a hidden cove off the coast of Sithorios, a strange clutch of eggs had been found, shimmering with the colors of starlight and smoke. Dragon eggs, it was said. They had been lost and presumed petrified for centuries. The rumor whispered that a priestess of R'hllor had foreseen they would hatch for the true heir of the Targaryen line, one anointed by the Lord of Light himself. Jon was skeptical. The last known dragons had died decades before he was born. Tales of eggs failing to hatch were as common as dust in old vaults. But Mazo's excitement was contagious. "If these eggs are truly meant for you," he said, "then it is yet another sign that you are the chosen champion." The idea of having dragons, of bringing fire incarnate into the world, terrified and thrilled Jon. Dragons had been the power of House Targaryen, their unstoppable advantage. Could Jon, a boy from Winterfell, truly harness such creatures? They set sail under the cover of night, heading for a place few from Westeros had ever seen. The journey was rife with storms. Jon spent many nights on the deck, clinging to the rail as fierce winds tore at the sails, wondering if it was all a fool's errand. Yet each time he wavered, he felt that warm pulse in his blood. The flames in the priest's brazier sometimes showed him fleeting images, glimpses of scaly silhouettes, black against a burning sky. They arrived at an old, abandoned stronghold near the northern edge of Sithorios, where a series of hidden caves overlooked the sea. The heat was sweltering, far beyond what Jon had ever experienced in the north. Ira and Mazo led the way by torchlight through winding tunnels that smelled of sulfur and damp stone. They encountered traps and signs of older inhabitants, skeletons bleached by time, shards of broken pottery. At last, deep within the labyrinth, they found a cavern alive with red crystals that refracted the torchlight like 1,000 tiny suns. It was there that Jon saw them. 3 dragon eggs, each larger than a man's head, resting atop a natural stone dais as if laid by some ancient hand. His breath caught. One egg glimmered black with streaks of scarlet that flashed when the light struck it. Another was a deep, smoky gray flecked with silver. The last was white as bone, veined with gold. They looked almost alive, but they felt cold to the touch like polished stone. Jon stood over them, uncertain, heart-hammering. This was madness. He was just Jon, the boy from Winterfell. And yet, Mazo urged him to kneel before the eggs. "Pray," he said gently. "Invoke the Lord of Light. If it is your destiny, these eggs will respond." Jon swallowed. He placed his palms against the cold shells, closed his eyes, and tried to summon the warmth that sometimes flickered in his chest. At first, he felt nothing but his own heartbeat. Then, slowly, a tingling spread from his fingertips up his arms. He tried to recall every teaching about R'hllor, about the champion Azor Ahai. He thought of the father who had lied to protect him, of the mother he never knew, of the siblings he had left behind in a kingdom teetering on the brink of war. He thought of the threat in the far north, of the nightmares that had haunted his dreams. He pleaded silently, "If I am truly meant to save them, give me the power to do so." Heat flared beneath his palms. He gasped, eyes shooting open. The black and scarlet egg glowed faintly as if an ember were buried deep within its shell. Jon glanced at Mazo, who looked almost delirious with hope. Ira's breath came in ragged spurts beside him. Then the light faded. Jon felt a twisting disappointment, yet the priest only smiled through tears of relief. "They are responding to your blood," Mazo said, voice shaking. "They are not dead. They await the moment." Jon felt a surge of awe and dread. The eggs were alive, or something close to it. And they were his. That realization pulled at him both an honor and a colossal weight of responsibility. If these dragons truly hatched under his hand, what would that make him in the eyes of the realm? In the coming weeks, they transported the eggs to a concealed red temple on the coast of Essos near Volantis. It was far from the prying eyes of the free cities, a place where the faithful of R'hllor gathered in large numbers. A labyrinth of halls extended beneath. A great statue of a warrior wreathed in flames. Priests prayed day and night. There, in a vast chamber lit by braziers of ever-burning fire, Jon was told to prepare a sacred ritual, one that might awaken the dragons. The ritual demanded sacrifice. Jon's stomach churned at the word. He remembered stories of Targaryens who dabbled in blood magic, of shadowbinders in Ahai. He wanted no part in a dark ceremony that might cost innocent lives. He voiced his concern to Mazo. But the older priest's expression was gentle. "Not all sacrifices are of blood," he said. "There are other forms. An offering of your own strength, your own flame." They prepared for days. Priests and priestesses chanted, the air thick with incense. Ira and Mazo guided Jon through elaborate prayers by the fireside, teaching him how to focus and channel the heat he felt within. He fasted until his vision blurred, immersing himself in scorching baths that made his skin redden. It was grueling, but each time he felt the flicker of power intensify like a banked fire fanned by careful hands. When the night of the ritual arrived, a roaring pyre was lit in the heart of the chamber. The eggs were set among the logs. Jon wore simple robes of white, and his hair, grown longer than in his Winterfell days, was tied back. Priest sang in a low drone that reverberated through Jon's bones. He stepped toward the pyre, his face slick with sweat, the heat scorching his cheeks. Fear fluttered in him like a caged bird. Could he truly do this? He looked at Mazo and Ira. Their faces shone with encouragement and urgency. Then he thought of his father, both of them, in a sense, Ned Stark, who had raised him, and Rhaegar Targaryen, whose blood ran in his veins. He thought of the countless lives in Westeros that would be threatened if the tales of White Walkers were true. He swallowed his terror and stepped into the flames. It happened swiftly. The fire licked at his robes, the heat seared his skin, but instead of agony, he felt a surreal, all-consuming warmth. The wave of pain he expected never came. His eyes flew wide in astonishment. Flames danced around him, yet he did not burn as a normal man would. The chanting of the priests seemed distant now, muffled by the roar in his ears. He reached out, grasped the egg that was black and scarlet, and pressed it to his chest. The shell grew hot, hotter than the forge at Winterfell. Jon clutched it regardless, a silent prayer on his lips. He felt something crack, a ripple under his hands. Then a shriek tore through the night, a sound neither human nor beast, but something in between. The chanting reached a fevered pitch. Jon staggered, still holding the egg, as hairline fractures spread across its surface. Steam and sparks burst into the air. The egg shattered. The creature that spilled into Jon's arms was dark as midnight, with wings that glistened like molten onyx in the firelight. Its eyes opened, gleaming red. A newborn dragon, shrieking its first breath in the world, rested against Jon's chest. At the same time, the other two eggs cracked as well, and from each shell emerged a hatchling, one gray and silver, one bone white with gold flecks. They hissed, their tiny limbs trembling, their wings twitching. Smoke curled from their nostrils as they tested the air. Jon stumbled out of the flames, the black one still clinging to him. Priest scrambled to reach him, exclaiming in awe. Ira helped him steady himself. His robe was singed, his skin reddened, but he was largely unharmed. He looked down at the hatchling in his arms, heart pounding. Jon wasn't sure why he thought it was female, stared back at him, eyes filled with primal intelligence. Unbidden tears welled in his own eyes. He realized with a jolt of clarity that these creatures were now bound to him by blood and fire. House Targaryen's magic lived again, awakened by an act of faith and defiance of natural law. Cheers rose in the chamber, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Mazo declared it a sign beyond question. Jon Snow, or perhaps Jon Targaryen, was Azor Ahai reborn, guardian of the living, the chosen champion. The hatchlings scrambled about, chirping with half-formed roars. Jon had no idea what it all meant, how he would care for them, or what the future held. He only knew that from this moment on, his life would never be the same. Word of the dragons hatching spread through the red temples of Essos like wildfire. Worshippers flocked to behold the reborn miracle of flame made flesh. Some fell to their knees at the mere sight of Jon, calling him the living avatar of Lawlor. Others were suspicious, cautious, uncertain whether this event heralded salvation or a new wave of Targaryen ambition. Jon found himself at the center of a growing storm of attention he had never sought. Mazo counseled him to accept it as a necessary burden. Ira helped keep him steady, reminding him that humility was a virtue even in the face of destiny. The dragons grew quickly on a diet of goat's milk and charred meat. Within weeks, their wings strengthened and they began to breathe tiny plumes of flame on their own. Jon named them quietly in private after heroes of myth. The black and scarlet he called Nymerian, the gray and silver he called Valerian, and the white and gold he called Silveria. They responded to his voice, scurrying across the temple floors to curl around his legs or perch on his shoulders. It was surreal, terrifying, and exhilarating. Their presence filled Jon with a sense of wonder, but also a sense of responsibility so immense it took his breath away. During that time, the War of the Five Kings raged across Westeros. Rumors came in fits and starts. Joffrey Baratheon, child of incest, sat on the Iron Throne. Robb Stark had been declared king in the north. Renly and Stannis Baratheon warred in the south. Balon Greyjoy reared his head with an iron fleet. The land was drenched in blood and betrayal. The Red Priests insisted that the true war lay beyond the squabbles of kings, that the White Walkers, the others, stirred once more. If their prophecy was correct, the living would need Azor Ahai and now dragons. Yet Jon could not remain hidden forever. The War of the Five Kings might seem petty compared to the threat of the White Walkers, but it also threatened to weaken the realm to such an extent that the North would be ripe for an undead invasion. Mazo believed the time was nearing for Jon to reveal himself, not just as a Targaryen scion, but as the anointed champion of the Lord of Light. Many in Westeros, of course, would not accept such a claim. And the Lannisters would almost certainly seek Jon's head if they feared a Targaryen resurgence. Even the North, battered by conflict, might not know what to make of him. But the Red Priests insisted the flames show that you must act soon or risk catastrophe. Jon was torn. He still felt more a Stark at heart than a Targaryen. He worried about his siblings, about Winterfell. News was scarce, but sometimes he dreamt of Arya, wild and sharp-eyed, forging her own path. He dreamt of Sansa trapped in King's Landing, subjected to the cruelty of the Lannisters. He dreamt of Robb leading armies in the field. Each dream felt like a dagger to the heart because he was not there for them. Was he truly protecting them by staying away or simply abandoning them? Prepare yourself, Ira told him. The time of waiting ends. He spent hours each day training with a slender longsword, forging a bond with his dragons and mastering the rudiments of flame magic that the Red Priests taught. It did not make him a sorcerer in the traditional sense. He could not hurl fireballs at will, but he learned how to sense and manipulate heat, how to use his faith in Lawler to strengthen his resolve and quicken his reflexes. The dragons responded to him in subtle ways, seeming to sense his emotions. Sometimes, in the hush of night, he heard them screeching in a language only they understood, and it stirred something ancient in his blood. Finally, word came that Winterfell had fallen, that there had been a betrayal. The details were murky. Theon Greyjoy had something to do with it. The Ironborn had sacked the castle. Bran and Rickon were rumored dead or lost. The news hit Jon like a physical blow. He raged, tearful and frantic. Mazo and Ira tried to calm him, but the grief he felt was immeasurable. He no longer had the luxury of inaction. The family he loved was being torn apart. Even if it meant risking everything, he had to return. "We will go with you," Mazo insisted. "The Red Temple stands behind you. We cannot bring an entire army, but we have allies, dozens of priests, fervent followers. And you have your dragons. That alone is an army in itself." "I don't want an army," Jon said bitterly. "I only want to protect my family." "Sometimes the only way to protect is to fight," Ira interjected quietly. "We do this not just for your family, but for all families who will face death in the darkness. Unite them under your flame." Jon feared he was stepping into a role he wasn't prepared for, a conqueror, or a liberator, or a king. But an unsteady kind of determination formed within him. If prophecy demanded he stand against the coming darkness, how could he do so when Westeros was tearing itself apart? He would have to find a way to quell the realm's divisions, or at least unite enough power to face the real enemy. Dragons had once forged the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps they could save it now. They set sail on a fleet of ships departing Volantis, heading first to Dragonstone. Jon's heart pounded as the ominous fortress loomed on the horizon, its black stone towers shaped like the horns of a slumbering dragon. It was said to be the ancestral seat of House Targaryen, where Aegon the Conqueror once planned his invasion of Westeros. Now it was under the control of Stannis Baratheon, if rumors were true. And yet, Jon's small contingent of Red Priests had ways of slipping in unnoticed, especially with the help of disillusioned soldiers or sympathetic merchants. Dragons soared overhead, still small but no longer mere hatchlings, and their silhouettes against the stormy sky struck fear into men's hearts. At night, Jon and his followers infiltrated a lesser-used cove on the island's coast, sneaking into the winding passages beneath the fortress. Guided by old maps from the temple, they made their way into the heart of Dragonstone, where the painted table of Westeros stood, large as life, in the council chamber. The presence of the table gave Jon a chill. Here Aegon had once plotted to bring the Seven Kingdoms to heel. Now Jon traced his fingers along the carved mountains of the north, the valleys of the Reach, the swirling shapes meant to represent rivers. "This is where I was born," he whispered, recalling the tales the Red Priests had gleaned from cryptic visions. Perhaps Rhaella Targaryen or someone else had been here, perhaps it was just rumor. But something about Dragonstone felt oddly familiar, like echoes in his blood. They encountered Stannis Baratheon's men soon enough. A clash was inevitable. Swords rang in the torchlight as Jon's handful of loyal Braavosi Sellswords and fervent priest warriors battled with the garrison. Jon fought with determined grace, illusions of the quiet bastard from Winterfell all but erased. He parried blows, calling forth a faint shimmer of heat with each strike, moving like a wraith. Nymerian, his black dragon, circled overhead, letting out a roar that made grown men tremble. The fighting halted when Stannis himself arrived, flanked by his knights and the Red Woman, Melisandre of Ashdai. Her flaming red hair and scarlet robes mirrored those of Mazo, yet there was a far more formidable aura about her. She stared at Jon as if she recognized him, her red eyes narrowing. The flicker of torchlight danced across her face, showing an almost reverent curiosity. "You," she said. "I have seen you in the flames." Mazo stepped forward, breathless from combat, staff in hand. "He is Azor Ahai reborn," he pronounced. "The Lord of Light's chosen champion." Melisandre's gaze flicked to Stannis. For the longest time, she had proclaimed Stannis as Azor Ahai. But confronted with Jon, with the living dragons and the aura of prophecy that clung to him like heat, she hesitated. Stannis scowled, uncertain whether to be enraged or incredulous. This was a man who prided himself on his own sense of destiny, largely shaped by Melisandre's counsel. "Impossible," Stannis spit out. "You are just a boy. This woman," he pointed at Melisandre, "has told me I am the one." Melisandre's eyes glowed with reflection of the torches. "The flames shift," she murmured. "Prophecy is not a straight road. Sometimes the champion reveals himself when the hour grows darkest. And I have dreamt of dragons, living dragons. It seems we were being guided here." Jon, chest heaving from the battle, dared to speak. "My lord, I seek not your crown. The realm is tearing itself apart while the true enemy gathers in the north. I come to unify those who would stand against the long night. The White Walkers are real. They bring a cold that will consume us all if we do not stand united." Stannis, ever the stoic, listened with a clenched jaw. He glanced at the dragons, which had settled around Jon in the shadows, their eyes glinting ominously. The weight of that sight and the flicker in Melisandre's eyes tempered his anger. "Why come here?" he demanded. "Why Dragonstone?" "Because I am of House Targaryen," Jon confessed, voice echoing in the chamber. "Rhaegar Targaryen was my father. I have come to claim my birthright, not to challenge your kingship but to gather what strength I can for the war that truly matters." The silence pressed down like a heavy shroud. Stannis was never a man easily swayed by words. Yet the presence of Melisandre, the hatchling dragons, and the swirl of prophecy hung in the air. In the end, it was Melisandre who spoke softly. "I see a greater purpose here, Stannis. Perhaps the Lord of Light has tested you only to guide you to the true champion." Something in her tone made Stannis bristle, but he was no fool. The dragons were real, and while Stannis had dedicated himself to the notion that he was the rightful king, he was also a man concerned with duty and the threat of the undead. Reluctantly, he agreed to a parley. Over the painted table, ironically enough, they spoke of the war in the north, the situation at the wall, and how the realm was fracturing. Stannis would not bend the knee to a Targaryen, not willingly, but a fragile alliance was formed. They would not slaughter each other here, not when they both believed in the threat of the great other. Melisandre insisted that the Red God had orchestrated this meeting. Jon found the woman unsettling, but at least she seemed to recognize the danger that lurked beyond petty dynastic claims. Jon's gaze roved over the carved map. He wondered if Robb Stark still led armies in the field. If King's Landing was as vile as rumor suggested under Joffrey's rule. If Daenerys Targaryen, rumored to be Rhaegar's sister, still lived across the sea. So many threads in this tapestry of war. He knew he must reach the north, see for himself the state of affairs. Because if the White Walkers had returned in force, time was short. Dragonstone became Jon's temporary foothold in Westeros. He and his Red Priest allies established themselves in a lesser wing of the fortress, not interfering with Stannis's men. The dragons roamed the courtyard, devouring goats and occasionally stirring the fear of the soldiers. Each passing day brought ravens bearing dire tidings. The war escalated. Tywin Lannister ground his enemies to dust. The Tyrells had joined the fray on the Lannister side. In the midst of it all, Jon remembered the words of prophecy. When the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, Azor Ahai shall be born amidst salt and smoke, to wake dragons out of stone. He had woken dragons from stone, in a manner of speaking. Now the darkness was sure to come. The only question was when. One fateful dawn, a dispatch arrived from the wall. It begged for aid. The Night's Watch had encountered horrors beyond the wall. Dead men walking, pale demons with blue eyes. Jon's blood chilled at the descriptions. This was it, the proof he had dreaded. The White Walkers were no mere children's tale. This letter, signed by Jeor Mormont, was a desperate plea to any and all who might heed it. Stannis, reading over Jon's shoulder, set his jaw. "This is why I rallied knights," he muttered. "I offered them the knowledge that the true threat comes from the north. Yet they squabble over crowns. Melisandre's voice was tense with urgency. This is our war, Stannis. The war. Lawler calls upon us to drive back the shadows. Jon closed his eyes, thinking of the land beyond the wall of Castle Black, and the oaths he had once intended to take. Then he looked at the dragons. Nymerian stretched her wings, letting out a hiss. We must go, Jon said quietly. We must bring dragons to the wall. Stannis stared at him, measuring. Finally, he nodded. Then we do it. Within a fortnight, the fortress bustled with preparations. Jon discovered he had more support than he expected. Many men who fought for Stannis had grown disillusioned with the Games of Thrones. If the White Walkers were real, they wanted to be on the right side of history. Others simply feared the wrath of dragons if they refused. Either way, they gathered enough ships and men to sail up the coast of Westeros. As they neared the north, the seas grew stormy and gray. Jon felt a tremor of anticipation as he glimpsed the rocky shores near Eastwatch by the sea. He was finally home, in a sense. The air was cold, the wind biting, and it reminded him of the boy he had been at Winterfell. But that boy was gone, replaced by this reluctant champion, with dragons in tow. They docked at Eastwatch, and the Night's Watch men stared in stunned silence as the black, gray, and white dragons soared overhead. Some men dropped to their knees, others gripped their weapons in fear. Jon disembarked, feeling the eyes of the Black Brothers upon him, wearing the dark cloak of a traveling knight but no official heraldry. He introduced himself as Jon Targaryen, though it felt strange on his tongue. Many recognized him. We heard you were Ned Stark's son, they murmured, confused. But the presence of the Red Priests and Melisandre, the aura of flame dancing around them, hushed arguments. Jeor Mormont, the old bear, had a grave countenance. He embraced Jon, if only briefly. We need every blade we can muster, he said simply. Winter is here. Days passed. News arrived of wildling activity, of an army led by Mance Raydo amassing beyond the wall. But that paled beside the accounts of White Walkers. At Castle Black, Jon's dragons perched on the higher ramparts, eyeing the swirling snow with bright curiosity. Despite the chill, they seemed unbothered, their inner fires kept them warm. Jon gathered the Night's Watch, Stannis' men, and the Red Priests in the courtyard. Standing on a makeshift platform, he looked out over the sea of faces, black cloaks, battered steel, banners of the flaming heart for Stannis, red-robed priests. Snow drifted, speckling everyone's hair. The dead come for us, Jon's voice carried through the still air. They do not care for your name, your rank, or your loyalties. They come for every living soul. We must stand together, or we will die alone. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Stannis' expression was stern, but approving. Melisandre, near the front, stood with her hands folded, eyes shining. Mazo hovered at Jon's side, whispering encouragement. Ira furred Jon a faint smile, a reminder that he was not alone. The men of the Night's Watch, bound by oath, had no illusions of political power. They only saw a chance at last for some meaningful aid. And the dragons overhead were a sign that maybe the tide could turn. Days turned into weeks of feverish preparations. Scouts ranged beyond the wall, bringing stories of spectral apparitions of undead bears and outriders. The nights grew colder. Jon spent time each evening practicing with Lightbringer, or what might become Lightbringer. A Red Priest blacksmith had forged a special sword for him, rumored to be made with spells of Valyrian steel. It glimmered darkly in the moonlight, and the priests insisted that once Jon's full power manifested, the blade would burn with living flame. Jon had yet to see such a miracle. He doubted, some nights, that he would. But he kept trying. In the chaos of these war preparations, Jon never forgot the heartbreak of Winterfell's fall and the uncertainty of his siblings' fates. He sent out ravens, calling on the north to rally at the wall. He hoped that if Robb was still alive, if there were any loyal bannermen of the Starks left, they would come. The north had always remembered, and now it needed saving. The war for the Iron Throne mattered little if they all became whites in the Night King's army. Yes, he had heard that name whispered by wildlings, the Night King. A legendary figure commanding the White Walkers, leading them to extinguish the warmth of the living world. At times, Jon had nightmares of cold blue eyes staring into his soul, seeing the line of Targaryen kings and Stark lords behind him, hunger in every icy breath. He would wake, drenched in sweat, only to see his dragons curled at his bedside, their presence a small comfort. They were living flame, the opposite of the dead chill creeping south. In the gloom of an early dawn, as watchmen paced the top of the wall, a horn blast echoed across the ice. 3 blasts, rarely heard, a sound that signaled the worst. The White Walkers were here. Men scrambled to positions, hearts pounding. Stannis barked orders, commanding his knights to man the battlements. The Red Priests lit braziers, chanting prayers to Lawler. Jon rushed for his sword, Lightbringer. The dragons stirred, sensing tension in their bond. From the top of the wall, Jon saw the snow swirling below, and beyond, the shapes in the gloom, thousands of undead forms, an army of wights. The Watchers swore they could see pale riders, figures with eyes like frozen stars. Fear clutched the fortress. Many men had never seen such abominations. Even Stannis, unyielding as stone, paled at the sight. Jon took a steadying breath. He could feel the heat in his chest, the slow burn that came from the rites he'd performed, the prophecy he carried. Lawler, if ever you heard me, hear me now, he murmured, touching the hilt of his sword. Grant me the power to save them. He turned to the men. Archers. He shouted. Flaming arrows. Aim for the wights. They fear fire. Priests keep chanting. Knights prepare to ride if they breach the gates. The wall must not fall. And so, the battle for the wall began. Arrows rained down, lit at braziers, slicing through the cold air to strike the undead below. The wights screeched as flaming shafts embedded in their rotting flesh. But wave after wave kept coming. Spears of ice flew up from the ground, launched by the White Walkers, impaling some of the men on the wall with lethal precision. Blood and snow mingled on the ice, painting a macabre tapestry of death. Jon brought his dragons to the top of the wall. Nymeria, Valerian, and Silveria spread their wings wide, letting out thunderous roars that shook the hearts of friend and foe alike. At Jon's urging, they launched into the sky, circling above the undead horde. Their flames cut through the darkness like bolts of living fury, setting the ground ablaze. The wights burned in clusters, limbs flailing grotesquely. For the first time, men cheered, hope flaring bright as the dragons rained fire upon the dead. Yet the White Walkers remained. Jon could see them in the distance, tall, gaunt figures on undead horses, swords gleaming with unnatural cold. They seemed unfazed by the flames. One lifted a long spear of ice and hurled it upward. Nymeria dodged in midair with a screech, the spear shattering against a chunk of ice. Another soared toward Valerian. It grazed the dragon's flank, leaving a streak of frost that made the beast roar in pain. Jon felt it like a jolt in his own side, their bond resonating with each wound. He gritted his teeth, heart pounding. The men on the wall were faring only marginally better, but the White Walkers had begun to freeze sections of the moat below. If they reached the gate, they could breach the wall eventually. Jon descended with a handful of red priests to the courtyard. He called for a small contingent of cavalry, those brave or mad enough to ride out with him. They would face the White Walkers in direct combat, for if they could destroy the leaders, the Whites might collapse. Men balked at the idea of charging into that icy storm, but some set their jaws and nodded, trust in their gazes. Jon had dragons, after all. Flames flickered along the braziers that lined the tunnel beneath the wall. Melisandre placed a hand on Jon's sword arm as he mounted a black courser. You carry the Lightbringer, she intoned. In the name of Lawler, claim your destiny. Jon swallowed. Pray for us. He led the riders out onto the field of churned snow and blood, the sky a slate-gray backdrop for the swirling flakes. The undead came at them in droves, but the priests unleashed blasts of fire from torches and staves. Jon swung his blade. It glowed faintly orange, as if heated by a forge each time it clashed with a white. Their decayed flesh shriveled under the impact, and the sword cut through them like they were made of rotted cloth. But the White Walkers themselves were another matter. Their weapons met Jon's with a shriek of ice on steel. He clenched his jaw, trying to muster the flame in his veins. A White Walker loomed before him, its face a mask of frost, mouth curling in silent malice. Their swords met. With each blow, a jarring cold spread up Jon's arm. He summoned the warmth in his chest, focusing on the sword, willing it to blaze as the Red Priests said it should. He glimpsed a swirl of dark magic in the White Walker's eyes, as if it knew him, recognized him as a threat. He snarled and struck with all his might. At first, it was just steel on ice. Then he felt a searing heat rush through his arm, down the sword. A flash of orange flame burst along the blade, roaring to life. The White Walker shrieked, staggering back. Jon seized the moment, slashing in a downward arc. Lightbringer cleaved into the walker, the flames devouring its icy form in a swirl of white steam and sparks. The creature shattered like fragile crystal, disintegrating into the snow. A hush fell around Jon for heartbeat. He looked at his sword, now wreathed in flickering fire, the steel radiant. He heard a roar overhead, Nymerian soared by, exhaling a torrent of flame. In that moment, Jon understood that for all his doubts, the prophecy had claimed him at last. Azor Ahai, the champion of the Lord of Light, the living embodiment of House Targaryen's fire and House Stark's ice. He lifted the blazing sword for all to see. The men rallied, hearts ignited by the sight. They fell upon the White Walkers and Whites with renewed ferocity. Arrows from the wall found their marks, and the dragons unleashed infernos that ravaged the undead ranks. Bit by agonizing bit, they pushed the horde back from the gates. White Walkers fell to Jon's flaming sword and the combined might of the Red Priests. Ira fought at his side, her staff swirling with cinders. At some point, they realized the White Walkers were retreating, fading into the swirling snow like phantoms, leaving the burnt, broken Whites behind. By nightfall, the battlefield lay strewn with charred corpses, shattered ice weapons, and the wounded living. But the wall still stood. Men huddled in exhaustion, trying to warm themselves by any surviving brazier. The dragons perched on the battlements, tongues of flame still licking around their jaws. Jon's sword cooled when the power receded, returning to mere steel, but the memory of its fire lingered. He had done what needed doing. The White Walkers had been driven back, at least for now. Jeor Mormont found Jon near the parapet where he stood gazing into the dark distance, searching for any sign of returning foes. Snow clung to Jon's hair, the wind stinging his face. Mormont put a hand on Jon's shoulder. "You've done us a great service. Many are calling you a hero already." Jon exhaled a cloudy breath. "The war's just begun. This was only a taste of what's coming." Mormont nodded, face grim. "Even so, you showed them we can fight back. Morale matters." Jon turned to see men tending to the wounded, priests chanting prayers to Lawler for healing. Stannis was barking orders, forever the commander, ensuring the defenses were strengthened. Melisandre and Mazo shared a wordless look as if acknowledging a shift in their spiritual tapestry. Jon lifted his gaze to the swirling night sky. The realm was still fractured, the Lannisters still plotted, and the War of the Five Kings had not ceased. But something momentous had occurred. Men had witnessed dragons in battle against an otherworldly enemy, and they had tasted a new hope. Jon closed his eyes, exhaustion coursing through him, and offered a silent prayer that Westeros might unite before the next onslaught. He didn't know the shape of tomorrow's battles, nor could he guess how the Southern Lords would react to word of a Targaryen bastard wielding a flaming sword. But for the first time, he felt certain that the faint, flickering light of dawn might yet break the endless night. If his existence could accomplish that, if being Azor Ahai reborn meant giving the living a chance, then he would bear the cost, no matter how heavy. He was the son of ice and fire, and his dragons would light the sky with their wings. And so, in the chill wind atop the wall, surrounded by silent watchers and the dying embers of battle, Jon swore to see this through. For his family, for the North, for all of Westeros. He was Azor Ahai reborn, and if the darkness wanted to claim this land, it would have to break him first. Night enveloped the wall in a hush broken only by the moan of wind and the muffled cries of the injured. Jon stood on the parapet until his legs felt numb from cold, his breath a ragged cloud in the air. Where the White Walkers had vanished, fresh snow was already covering the churned earth and the smashed remains of Whites. The carnage below had been extraordinary, a horror that most men wouldn't soon forget. And it was only the first true taste of what the Great Other could unleash. He wondered how many more nights like this they would have, how many more times he would be forced to stand against that dreadful cold. Men below were finishing the dreadful task of gathering bodies of both the dead and the undead. Pyres flared near the courtyard, casting a flickering glow against the towering ice. Soot and the stench of burning flesh clawed at the nostrils, but no one dared skip the custom of burning the corpses. The last thing any of them wanted was more Whites crawling from the shadows. As night deepened, there was little time for grief. The men of the Night's Watch and Stannis' soldiers tended to urgent tasks first, stabilizing the wounded, reinforcing barricades, organizing a watch schedule that would ensure no surprise assault came before dawn. Several exhausted Black brothers had slumped against the wall's base, half asleep, only to be kicked upright by their superiors to keep them moving. If they slept now, they might never wake. Jon finally tore himself from the view and descended a set of wooden stairs. His dragons, having feasted on a burned cluster of Whites, now circled above the courtyard. Each pass of their wings brought a rush of heated air that rippled the snow. Occasionally, one of them would land on the ramparts for a moment, letting out a raspy, trilling cry before launching themselves back into the sky in restless vigilance. Jon felt their exhaustion through the bond they shared, but also their fierce determination, a kind of primal hunger to keep the cold at bay. He wanted to urge them to rest, yet he could not bring himself to order them away. The presence of dragons overhead reminded all who labored that they were not alone in this battle. He moved among the survivors, eyes settling on wounded men laid out on makeshift beds, cloaks spread on the frozen ground, straw hastily gathered beneath them. Red priests crouched by some, hands hovering over burns and gashes, chanting in low voices. The smell of herbs and incense mixed with blood. Where the priests pressed their hands, wounds sometimes stopped bleeding altogether, as if the faintest whisper of Lawloress power answered their pleas. Not all could be saved, but every life spared was a small victory. Ira knelt by a fallen knight from Stannis' retinue, her slender hand on the man's forehead, a trickle of blood seeping from his side. Her expression was intent but grave, as though she were wrestling with forces beyond her command. When she noticed Jon watching, she gave him a slight nod and a tired smile, then returned her focus to the wounded knight. Jon wished he had some mastery of healing, some miracle to offer. But his was a power of fire and steel, born for war. He knelt by another soldier, pressing a rag to a deep slash near the man's collarbone. The soldier moaned, eyes fluttering. Jon whispered an apology, trying to stanch the bleeding until one of the priests could tend to him. Around them, men's groans and the crackle of torches underscored the cost of this victory. Mazo found Jon in the midst of it, setting aside his ornate staff to kneel and help lift a delirious black brother onto a pallet. There was no room for ceremony now. The older priest's robes were stained with blood and soot, but his eyes glowed with a solemn pride. "You did well," he murmured to Jon, voice barely audible above the din. "We've driven them back this time." Jon swallowed hard. He didn't feel triumphant. Too many men lay dying, and the cold pressed in from all sides like a relentless tide. He managed a nod. "We did," he said softly. "But you know they'll return." "They will," Mazo agreed. "And we'll have to be ready." Hours dragged on until the eastern sky began to lighten with the faint promise of dawn. Exhausted watchers patrolled the parapets, faces haggard. The first weak rays of sunlight limned the top of the wall in pale gold. Melisandre had said that the dawn carried special power against darkness. Jon hoped she was right, though he saw only weary men and smoldering pyres beneath that sky. By midday, a semblance of routine settled over Castle Black. Maester Aemon, aged and blind, had come out of his chambers to coordinate healing efforts as best he could, offering what knowledge he had of medicinal herbs. Jon found him near the rookery, quietly conferring with a black brother who read him the list of casualties. Jon felt a lump in his throat at the recitation of names. He recognized too many. The Night's Watch had never been vast in numbers, and these losses were crippling. Ed Tollett, Dolorous Ed, was alive, but badly wounded in the leg. Gren had lost 3 fingers to an ice spear. PYP was among the missing. No one had seen him after the Whites surged up the outer slope. Jon took a moment alone, leaning against the wall's chilled surface, mind churning. They had staved off one attack, but the war stretched before them like a dark river, and he was the one carrying this mantle of Azor Ahai. He glanced down at his hands, recalling how Lightbringer had burst into flame in the heat of battle, how the White Walker had screamed as the steel cut through its frozen flesh. He knew there was no turning away from it anymore. The power had manifested, confirming every prophecy the Red Priests had whispered. If he questioned it now, it would be willful blindness. The question was whether that power would be enough, and how many would die waiting for him to grow into the role. He resolved to check on the dragons. They had settled in the courtyard once they'd grown too tired to remain aloft. A ring of soldiers and black brothers kept a wide berth, curious and wary of these living weapons. Jon approached carefully, mindful of the lethal jaws and claws. Nymerian, the black and scarlet, rose to her hind legs at his approach, letting out a soft rumble. Valerian and Silveria also stirred, though they seemed calmer. Silveria's white and gold scales gleamed like hoarfrost in the noon sun, lending her an almost ethereal beauty. Jon extended a hand, palm up, feeling that tangible bond that linked them. He thought of warmth, of safety. Nymerian lowered her head, pressing her snout to his palm. Her breath was hot enough to scorch hair, but Jon knew she would not harm him. Men around them stared in wonder as Jon stroked the dragon's scaled neck. He offered her a chunk of charred meat, which she devoured greedily, eyes slitting in pleasure. Valerian hissed jealously, and Jon had to toss another chunk his way. Despite the death and chaos, he managed a faint smile at their almost petulant squabbling. They were fearsome creatures, but also strangely innocent in their own manner, as though the world beyond hunting, flying, and the bond they shared with Jon didn't exist. "The men are terrified of them," came a voice from behind, and Jon turned to see Stannis Baratheon striding forward with Melisandre in tow. He wore a heavy fur cloak over his armor, his jaw tight. "Some whisper that these beasts are as likely to burn us as the dead." Jon shook his head. "They won't," he said quietly. "They fight for the living. For me." He hesitated, then met Stannis's eyes. "But I understand their fear." Stannis studied the dragons with a calculating gaze. "Fear may not be the worst tool," he said at length. "The North needs strength to unite under. Perhaps your dragons can provide that, if men come to see them as saviors rather than devils." He turned, scanning the courtyard. "Still, we've gained only a respite. I intend to rally more men here, no matter what happens to my claim in the south. The realm's petty wars won't matter when the White Walkers pour across the wall." Jon glanced at Melisandre, whose red robes almost glowed in the winter light. Her expression was serene, with that unwavering faith in her eyes. He felt a slight discomfort around her. She had once named Stannis as Azor Ahai, yet now recognized that mantle in Jon. He wondered if she harbored resentment, or if she viewed Stannis as simply another chess piece in Lawleresque grand design. Whatever the case, he welcomed any ally who would fight the true threat. That night, a council was held in the cramped confines of the Lord Commander's chamber. Jeor Mormont presided, though it was a testament to the precarious times that Stannis Baratheon was given a seat at the table, and so was Jon. Melisandre, Mazo, Ira, and several of Stannis's commanders joined, as did a handful of higher-ranked Black brothers. The room was thick with tension. A single brazier offered warmth, flames dancing in iron tongues, making shadows flicker on the rough stone walls. Jeor Mormont leaned forward, crossing his scarred arms on the table. "We barely held them off last night. Our casualties are steep, and we haven't the numbers to repel another major attack, let alone multiple." Street. Annis nodded stiffly. "I've sent ravens to northern lords ordering them to march here if they still have the men. The Boltons, the Karstarks, the Umbers, though the Boltons," he grimaced. Everyone knew of the whispers that Roose Bolton had thrown in with the Lannisters or else declared loyalty to no one. Word was that Bolton had taken advantage of the chaos in the north to press his advantage. None trusted him. "Some may not answer your summons," Mormont said grimly. "They have their own battles." "Then they're fools," Stannis barked. "No castle is safe from whites. I cannot force sense upon them, but they will answer one way or another. We must prepare for the worst. Another White Walker host could arrive at any time. They did not appear to have a single commander in the field last night. That was a probing attack, or so it seemed." Jon felt a chill in the base of his spine. "We all saw how quickly they can amass the dead. Every loss we suffer becomes another soldier for them. We need to shore up the wall and perhaps hold Moat Cailin if the worst happens." He paused, remembering the old fortress that served as the key to the north. "If the wall falls, the next line of defense is deep in northern territory. But we cannot allow that." The men exchanged anxious glances. Melisandre's voice cut through the tension. "When the true darkness falls, fire is our greatest ally. We should gather wood, oil, anything that burns. Build pyres, create a ring of flame they cannot cross." With Azor Ahai at the center, she turned her red-eyed gaze to Jon. "We can push them back." Jon wasn't sure if he believed her absolute confidence, but he nodded. It was better to be over-prepared than undone by the next onslaught. "There's another matter," he began. "The wildlings. Mance Raydo is out there with a large host, possibly tens of thousands. They're desperate to flee the White Walkers crossing the wall to survive. We could ally with them. Let them through, or some of them, in exchange for their help. The more swords on our side, the better." That notion immediately caused an uproar. Some of the Night's Watch officers objected fiercely. "Traitors and murderers," one hissed. "They've been our enemies for generations," spat another. "We can't just open our gates to them." Jon raised a placating hand. "We won't survive otherwise. We need every man and woman who knows how to fight, and they have as much reason to fight the White Walkers as we do. Mance was once of the Night's Watch. He understands what we face." Stannis narrowed his eyes. "If they kneel to me, perhaps I'll consider it," he said, though his tone conveyed doubt. Jon exhaled. "We have more to worry about than who bends the knee. We can't afford that pride, not if tens of thousands of the free folk could bolster our ranks." Arguments flared around the table, intensifying until Jeor Mormont slammed a fist down, calling for order. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. Jon would take a small contingent beyond the wall to negotiate with the wildlings, find Mance Rayder, and attempt an alliance. The risk was obvious. If the wildlings refused or attacked, Jon would be trapped. But he insisted that the potential payoff outweighed the risk. Mormont gave him a heavy-lidded look but finally relented. Stannis simply shook his head, muttering about trusting savages. Yet Melisandre, strangely, appeared thoughtful, as if she sensed some greater plan at work. Mazo supported Jon wholeheartedly, ready to see the free folk brought into the light. The next morning, Jon mounted his courser and rode out of Castle Black's massive gates, accompanied by a dozen men, Black brothers with bows, a pair of Stannis's knights, plus Ira, who insisted on standing by him, and a small number of red-robed fighters sworn to Lawler. Above them, the dragon's sword. Nymerian, Valerian, and Silveria were too large now to remain cooped up within the walls, and their presence would be a crucial bargaining chip. In truth, Jon suspected the wildlings might be more inclined to talk if they saw the living flame overhead. They advanced into the snowy wilderness, the crunch of hooves on ice the only sound. The cold was biting, slicing through layers of fur. The further they rode, the more they saw signs of the White Walkers' passage, scorched patches of land where whites had been burned, half-devoured corpses of unfortunate travelers. After hours of riding, they came upon a deserted encampment littered with broken tents and scattered bones. Ravens circled overhead, cawing. Ira murmured a prayer under her breath. At dusk, they made camp in a sheltered hollow near a frozen stream. The dragons curled around the perimeter, effectively forming a living barrier. Ira used her staff to spark a small fire, and they huddled close, recalling that whites might roam anywhere. Jon stayed awake long after the others dozed, gazing at the distant shapes of trees wreathed in moonlight. He thought of the weirwoods in the Godwood at Winterfell, the face carved in that ancient bark, and the prayers he used to offer quietly. The power he felt now had overshadowed that simpler faith in the old gods, yet he could not forget that he was partly of the north of the Starks. The swirl of identity made him ache, longing for a simpler time that would never come again. They traveled further north the next day, skirting the haunted forest's edge until they spotted traces of the wildling host. Climbing a ridge, they beheld columns of smoke drifting from the valley below. Tents and lean-tos formed a ragged sprawl, thousands strong, but with a desperate look, people who had nowhere else to go. Figures moved among the tents, children crying, the elderly wrapped in hides. Jon recognized at once that these people were not a mere raiding party. They were families fleeing certain death. Mance Rayder's entire following had gathered, pinned between the wall and the White Walkers. Jon guided his party down carefully, arms raised in a gesture of peace. The dragons remained overhead, drawing alarmed shrieks from the wildlings. Men rushed forward with spears and bows. Women clutched children close. Harsh voices shouted to raise the alarm. But Jon continued calmly, calling out, "We come to talk. We mean no harm unless you give us no choice." A tall man with a wolfish grin stepped from the throng, an axe slung over his shoulder. Tormund Giant Bane, Jon guessed. He recognized the ginger beard and massive build from rumors. Tormund bared his teeth but did not attack. "You're brave, Crow," he said, eyeing Jon and the men behind him. "Bringing your scale beasts to put fear in our hearts, eh?" Jon halted, meeting Tormund's stare. "It's not fear we want," he said. "We want to help you cross the wall." A hush fell, broken only by the hiss of the wind and the distant roar of dragons. Some of the wildlings looked at Jon as if he were mad. Others muttered about red priests, about the rumors of a Targaryen with 3 dragons. Tormund regarded him with open curiosity, then lifted his chin. "You best talk to Mance," he growled. "He'll want to hear this himself." They were led deeper into the encampment. The smell of smoke and unwashed bodies mingled with the tang of meat cooking over open fires. Jon's men tensed at the sight of hundreds of wildling warriors, but no one attacked. Children ran after the dragon's silhouettes, pointing and laughing in awe. The entire camp felt like a group of people poised on the edge of a precipice, starving, fearful, desperate to survive the endless winter pressing from behind. Mance Rayder's tent was larger than most, if no more luxurious. Guards stood at its entrance, armed with crude spears. Tormund shouldered his way in without ceremony, leading Jon and Ira. The rest of Jon's men waited outside, uneasy. Inside the tent, Mance Rayder rose from a stool draped in furs. He was tall, lean, with keen eyes that took in every detail at a glance. Jon recognized him from descriptions. This was the king beyond the wall, once of the Night's Watch, now the leader of a massive coalition of free folk. Mance tilted his head, mouth quirking in something like a smile. "Jon Snow," he said, voice calm and not entirely surprised. "I heard you might come. There are whispers that you're no longer just a crow from Winterfell. Some say you've got dragon's blood, among other things." Jon nodded, heart pounding. It's true. Rhaegar Targaryen was my father. And I'm also Eddard Stark's nephew. I was raised as a Stark bastard, but I found out the truth across the sea. I've come to the Wall to fight the White Walkers, and I know you're trying to lead your people south, away from the dead. Mance laughed softly, though there was no real mirth in his eyes. Lead them, indeed. Most of these people have known nothing but the land beyond the Wall their entire lives. Now that land is trying to kill them. We have thousands of women, children, old folk. The crows in Castle Black would rather see us all dead if rumor holds. They'd rather keep you out, Jon said, but that's changed. Or it can change. We both face a greater enemy. If we don't unite, we'll die. He hesitated. There is a chance I can convince the Night's Watch and the king in the north, if he can be found, to let you cross. Stannis Baratheon is also at the Wall, and he calls himself king. He wants you to bend the knee, though. I don't. I just want you to join us. Mance studied Jon's face. And you speak for all these kings, do you? I can try, Jon said evenly. Ultimately, it's your survival at stake. You can try to breach the Wall by force, but you'll lose thousands in the effort, and the White Walkers might finish what the Night's Watch starts. Or we can open the gate, let your people through, and stand against the dead together. Tormund snorted. You think men who've fought each other for centuries will just set that aside? I do, Jon said, because the dead don't care which side of the Wall we stand on. A hush fell. Mance looked tired, as if he'd considered these arguments 1,000 times over. At length he said, the biggest challenge is trust. My people have been hunted, spat upon, treated like beasts by the crows. We'd rather die free than live on our knees. You don't have to kneel, Jon said. If we defeat the dead, you can go where you wish. Settle in the Gift or beyond. I'm not offering subjugation, I'm offering alliance. The only price is that you help fight when the White Walkers come. Mance folded his arms, expression inscrutable. The king beyond the Wall is not in the habit of kneeling. But I'm not blind. I've seen the White Walkers, lost men to them, fought whites in the night. I know what's coming. He paused, gaze flicking to Ira, who stood quietly near Jon, red robes draped over her lean frame. And I see you've brought some foreign god with you. Ira inclined her head. Lawler, the Lord of Light, stands for the living. We want to help you survive. Mance sighed. This is a bitter taste. But maybe it's the only chance. I'll agree to an alliance on the terms that my people keep our freedom. We'll help defend the Wall against the White Walkers, but I won't force them to bend the knee to Stannis or anyone else. You talk to your black brothers and you talk to this would-be king, make them see reason. Then we'll pass through the gates. Jon nodded, relief warring with anxiety in his chest. I'll do everything I can. But we must move quickly. We had a major battle already. The next time, they might bring a far larger force. Mance ran a hand through his hair. We're prepared to move, but not everyone can travel quickly. You'll need to open the way soon. If the crows show up with steel, we'll defend ourselves as best we can. His tone carried an unspoken threat. We won't go quietly. Jon understood. Give me 2 days to make preparations. If all goes well, you'll see the gates open. I'll do my best to prevent any bloodshed. He extended a hand, feeling tension coil in his shoulders. In a different world, Mance Rayder might have been an enemy, a renegade from the Watch. Now he might be the ally who saved them all. Mance regarded Jon's outstretched hand for a moment, then clasped it. Their gazes locked. Ira exhaled a soft breath as if sensing the weight of history in that handshake. Perhaps in that tent of hides and furs a portion of the future was decided. Outside, the sun hung low, painting the snowfields in hues of pink and orange. Word spread fast among the wildlings that the king beyond the Wall had struck an accord with the dragon-wielding crow. Some were skeptical, cursing out loud about trusting kneelers. Others were visibly relieved. Tormund escorted Jon's party back to their horses, scratching at his beard with an unreadable expression. If you betray us, he said, I'll rip your guts out and feed them to that black dragon of yours. Jon mustered a wry grin. I won't betray you. We need your help. Tormund studied Jon a moment longer, then extended the handle of a flask. A drink for the road, Crow? Jon hesitated, then accepted. The liquor burned going down, warming him from the inside. Tormund clapped him on the back, then turned away with a hearty laugh. Tensions aside, it seemed a seed of grudging respect might be forming. Jon and his escort rode for Castle Black with haste. Darkness gathered quickly, forcing them to make camp halfway, but by midday of the next day, the Wall loomed into view, its sheer icy face reflecting sunlight. As they approached, Jon saw watchers on the ramparts, and he sensed the tension from a distance. By now, no doubt, ravens had come from the wildling encampment, or else watchers had spotted them. He only prayed that no hot-headed officer decided to open fire prematurely. They rode into the courtyard. Stannis and Jeor Mormont were already waiting, flanked by black brothers with crossbows and knights with swords at their hips. Melisandre and Mazo stood nearby, silent as carved statues. The expressions of all assembled men were grim. Jon dismounted, gave Ira a grateful nod, then stepped forward. He explained everything, Mance's agreement to ally if his people could pass, no kneeling or subjugation demanded. He left out no details, even Tormund's threats. When he finished, the hush was so deep he could hear the crackle of a distant hearth. Stannis's face darkened like a thundercloud. "No kneeling," he muttered. "You want me to cede my authority to a pack of brigands and thieves?" "They're free folk," Jon replied, keeping his tone steady. "And yes, that means they don't kneel. They're not Southerners, nor even Northerners. They fought us because we forced them to live in an inhospitable land with no recourse. Now the dead are pushing them into our territory and they have no choice but to fight beside us or be slaughtered." Stannis's jaw flexed. "And if they rebel once inside the wall? Loot our stores? Murder our men?" Jeor Mormont cleared his throat. "One problem at a time, my lord. Right now, if they remain on the north side of the wall, they'll either storm it in desperation or die to the White Walkers, and probably join their ranks as whites. That's worse for us." Melisandre's red eyes flicked to Jon. "The Lord of Light sees a path of fire and union, not strife. Let them come. If they betray us, the flames will judge them." Stannis offered her a sharp look, but she did not blink. Jon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He could see Stannis's pride warring with practicality. In the end, the king's desire to defend the realm won out. "Very well," Stannis said at last, voice clipped. "They can pass. But I'll not feed them, nor will I allow chaos behind my lines. You and the Watch can figure out how to settle them. If they want to fight, they'll follow my orders. Otherwise, I'll have them locked away or sent further south as refugees. Is that understood?" Jon glanced at Jeor Mormont, who nodded in cautious agreement. "We'll do what we must," Mormont said. "We don't have the supplies to feed that many, but we can share what we have. We'll scavenge from the gift," Jon added quickly. "We can hunt, gather. The free folk are used to surviving off the land. And maybe we can negotiate some trade with the northern lords, assuming they come." With the matter grudgingly settled, preparations were made to open the wall's main gates. The Black brothers looked uneasy, some even furious, at the idea of letting wildlings pass peacefully. But Jeor Mormont made it clear that any disobedience would be met with swift punishment. The Red Priests helped set up large bonfires outside, partly to guide the free folk in and partly to reduce the threat of whites sneaking into the crowd. Stannis's men organized watch stations, and as if to serve as a final deterrent against betrayal, Jon's dragons perched near the gates, sending out the occasional low, rumbling growl. The next day, just after dawn, the wildlings came. At first, it was only a trickle long-haired men and women guiding children by the hand, carrying bundles of meager possessions. They kept their eyes down, warily passing the knights who stood with swords in hand. But no one attacked. The knights simply watched, flanked by black brothers who looked equally grim. Then more wildlings followed, entire families, old grandmothers hobbling under furs, adolescent boys glancing around in fearful awe. Some wore bones in their hair or carried clubs studded with stone. It was a slow, cautious procession. Mance Rayder, Tormund, and a handful of their chieftains rode near the rear, ensuring everyone kept moving. Jon stood to one side with Ira and Mazo, observing the biggest wave of wildlings Castle Black had ever seen cross the threshold peacefully. His dragons roost on an outcrop of icy stone above, occasionally ruffling their wings. He felt an odd swirl of emotions, relief that it was working, fear that a single spark of violence could ignite a massacre, that something so monumental was happening right before his eyes. This bridging of centuries-old hatred might be the key to survival. Stannis stood on a wooden platform, arms folded, face grim as though chewing on a lemon. But he did not interfere. Melisandre stayed near him, lips moving in silent prayer to Lawler, or so Jon guessed. Jeor Mormont coordinated the Black brothers near the gate, ensuring the crowd passed in orderly fashion. As hours wore on, thousands came through, forming a ramshackle sprawl in the fields just south of the wall. Tents sprang up, people lit fires for warmth, and the entire area thrummed with tension. Yet it was done. They were on the side, no longer a threat from beyond, and each one was a potential ally against the White Walkers. Tormund approached Jon in the late afternoon, stopping short when Nymerian peered down from her perch, head cocked as if assessing him. "You keep your beasts well," Tormund remarked. "No one's been roasted yet." "That's a start." Jon offered a thin smile. "Let's hope we don't have to roast anyone at all." "Are your people settling in?" Tormund grimaced. "As best we can. They'd prefer a hot meal and a warm bed, but that's unlikely." Jon sighed. "We'll do what we can. The Night's Watch is no more comfortable than you are, trust me. But at least you're not on the other side of the wall with the dead." Tormund spat on the ground. "Aye, that's something." Within days, a sort of uneasy coexistence formed. The Black Brothers tolerated the wildlings in their midst, though scuffles broke out here and there. One night, a group of wildling youths got into a drunken brawl with a couple of Stannis' knights, leaving 2 men dead. Tensions flared. Stannis demanded justice. Mance refused to hand over the youths. Jon had to intervene, orchestrating a compromise where restitution was paid in supplies and the offenders were given labor duties rather than executed. It was a delicate balance, a tinderbox waiting for one spark. Meanwhile, the threat of another White Walker attack loomed. Scouts ventured beyond the wall, returning with reports of roving packs of whites, partially burned as if they'd been left behind by the main host. No sign of the Pale Riders yet. Still, everyone braced for another assault. Jeor Mormont ensured the men took shifts repairing sections of the wall's defenses. Mazo and Ira led groups of red priests in nightly rituals, building large bonfires and chanting for protection. Jon, when he wasn't dealing with disputes or commanding the watch, spent time with his dragons, now large enough that the largest of them, Nymerian, could nearly fill the courtyard with her wings. He tried to keep them fed, no easy task, as goats and sheep were in short supply, and to strengthen the bond that would be crucial in battle. He also received ravens with alarming news from the rest of Westeros. House Stark's fortunes had sunk. Rumors indicated Robb Stark had been betrayed at a wedding in the Twins, that he and his mother were slaughtered there. No one seemed certain who held Winterfell now. Some said it was Roose Bolton, others claimed the Ironborn had retreated. Chaos spread across the land as the Lannisters and their allies consolidated power in the south. King Joffrey still sat the Iron Throne, or so the letter said, though some whispered that after King Joffrey's death rumor placed it as poisoning at his own wedding, Tommen was crowned. The realm was drowning in ever-shifting alliances. Jon read these reports with a stony face, heart twisted in sorrow and rage. Robb dead, possibly Catelyn too, it was unthinkable. He found himself cursing the men who had orchestrated that vile betrayal, the Freys, the Boltons. The final hope for a united North under House Stark seemed extinguished. Yet here Jon stood, the last true Stark blood, with Targaryen blood as well, fighting a war that overshadowed all southern politics. He felt cut adrift, no longer certain whether the name Stark carried any meaning in the eyes of lords and ladies south of the neck. Perhaps they considered the North a lost cause. One evening, Jon found himself brooding by a crackling fire in the common hall while the smell of stew drifted through the air, thin stew, mostly watery, but better than nothing. Ira quietly entered, settling beside him, offering a cup of hot wine. She had an uncanny ability to sense when he was distressed, and her presence was comforting in ways that words often fail to capture. "You've heard about Robb?" she asked gently, touching his arm. Jon nodded, staring into the flames. "He was my brother in every way that mattered. And now he's gone." He clenched his jaw. "Slaughtered at a wedding. It's monstrous." She lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry. The tragedies of this land run deep. I wish there were more we could do to ease it. It makes me want to ride south," Jon admitted, frustration edging his voice, "and burn the Freys, the Boltons, the Lannisters, whoever had a hand in this. But that won't stop the White Walkers. No matter how much my heart craves vengeance, the bigger threat looms. And my family," his voice caught. "What of Arya, Sansa, Bran, Rickon? Are they alive?" Ira squeezed his hand gently. "You hold so much weight on your shoulders, Jon. Remember that you can't protect everyone if you rush into vengeance. We are here to win the war against death itself. Perhaps when that's done, there will be time to rebuild or to avenge." He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the fire wash over him. "I know," he said softly. "I have to see this through." The next morning, as the gloom of a winter dawn broke, a horn blast reverberated from the top of the wall. One blast meant Rangers returning, but 2 blasts meant something else. Jon's pulse quickened. He raced outside where men were already gathering along the ramparts. A second blast echoed. That meant wildlings or foes. But the wildlings were already here, inside the wall. Jon felt dread coil in his stomach. He scrambled up the wooden stairs to the top of the wall. The icy wind whipped his cloak. The vantage point was dizzying. 300 feet below, the ground spread out in a mosaic of white and black shapes. He scanned the horizon. There, in the distance, he spied movement in the swirling snow. A host approached. Men or something else. Another horn blast sounded, clarifying the message to all watchers. An armed host was coming from the south. Jon frowned. Not from beyond the wall, he asked a watchman who was peering through a battered bronze eyeglass. No, from the King's Road that leads north. They've got banners. Hard to see which ones. Jon took the eyeglass, leaning forward. Through the frosted lens, he glimpsed shapes of mounted knights, perhaps a few hundred in number. Their banners snapped in the wind, though the angle made it difficult to discern sigils. He caught glimpses of something that might be a flayed man. His blood ran cold. Roose Bolton's banner was the flayed man of the Dreadfort. If that was truly who approached, it could mean disaster. The Bolton bastard, Ramsay, was rumored to be even more monstrous than his father. Jon ground his teeth. He'd heard that Roose might have taken the title of Warden of the North from the Iron Throne. If he came here, perhaps it was to assert control. The Watchers confirmed the presence of other banners, possibly Karstark or Umber, but who truly followed Bolton now was murky. Jon descended, mustering men with a tense sense of urgency. Stannis was quickly informed. He bellowed for his knights to form up outside the gates, swords and shields at the ready. The wildlings bristled, suspicious of any southern host who marched into the north with ambitions of rule. The Black brothers hurried to don black cloaks and bows, prepared to defend Castle Black from an attack they had not anticipated. The dragons, sensing their master's agitation, took to the sky. Their roars rolled over the fortress like thunder. Any approaching army would see them soon enough. Snow swirled in stinging gusts as Jon, Stannis, and a handful of others rode to meet the newcomers in a field just south of Castle Black's outer palisade. Soldiers formed rough lines behind them. Black brothers with crossbows, Stannis's knights in battered armor, and scattered wildling warriors who stood warily, axes and spears at the ready. Overhead, Nymeria and her siblings circled, the living embodiment of House Targaryen's ancient might. At the forefront of the newcomers, a single rider bearing the flayed man banner cantered forward, flanked by men in pale armor. Jon's heart hammered. He recognized the sallow face, the thin mouth pressed in a perpetual line of disdain. Roose Bolton, cast in the gray light like a specter. He was said to be cunning, unemotional, willing to commit atrocities if it served his aims. He drew his mount to a halt well within bowshot. Behind him, ranks of Bolton soldiers fanned out. Their leather and steel armor dyed a ghostly grayish pink that resembled dead flesh. Stannis urged his horse forward a step. "Roose Bolton," he shouted, voice echoing in the frigid air. "What brings you to the wall?" Bolton's gaze flicked across the lines of men, Night's Watch, free folk, red-robed priests. Then his attention settled on the dragons overhead, face inscrutable. "Word travels south," he said, voice calm but carrying enough to be heard. "They say the bastard of Ned Stark has returned with dragons, that Stannis Baratheon claims dominion over the north, and that the wall is in turmoil. As the newly appointed Warden of the North, I have come to see the truth." Jon bristled at the word bastard, though he kept silent. He wasn't truly Ned Stark's bastard after all, but that hardly mattered to Bolton. The man knew how to twist a knife with words. Stannis, however, wasted no time. "We have no interest in your claims," he snapped. "The dead are the enemy, not any living house. If you've come to posture, I warn you, we have no patience for it." Bolton's thin lips curved in a frigid smile. "Indeed, the letters from King's Landing say you style yourself a king, Lord Stannis. I was sent here partly to ascertain your intentions, and partly to maintain order in the north. You, however, harbor wildlings." He cast a disdainful glance at a group behind Jon, and talk of dead men walking. "They do walk," Jon interjected sharply. "We've fought them. White walkers lead armies of whites." Bolton raised an eyebrow. "Yes, so the rumors say. Yet rumor can be embellished. What I see before me is a ragtag host allied with savage free folk, and a few interesting beasts overhead." His gaze drifted to Nymeria, circling under the clouds. If these are truly dragons, they might pose a threat to King Tommen's peace. I come with an offer. Yield the fortress to me and perhaps we can come to terms. If you resist, well, King's Landing has mandated that the North be brought under control. Jon's anger flared like a banked fire stoked suddenly. You come to Castle Black, where the Night's Watch stands guard over the realm, and demand we yield? You have no authority here. The Watch is sworn to protect the realm from threats beyond the wall. We can't be commanded by Warden or King. And the dragons you see aren't meant for your petty wars. Bolton regarded him as one might a disobedient dog. You speak as if you have power, bastard. But I see only men in rags and a few exhausted knights behind you. The dragons do worry me, but I suspect they can be killed like any beast. Stannis's face burned with fury. You are a fool if you think that. We've already used these dragons to drive back creatures you cannot even fathom. If you stand against us, you stand against the realm's only hope of surviving the long night. Bolton tilted his head. Then we have a dilemma. I came to bring the king's peace. You speak of an apocalyptic threat. Perhaps I'd be wise to slay you all and present these dragons to the Iron Throne as trophies. That might earn me favor. Before Stannis could retort, an ear-splitting roar cracked the sky. Nymerean dove, passing mere yards overhead. The sudden gust of wind from her wings buffeted Bolton and his men, causing horses to rear and whinny in terror. Jon glimpsed several soldiers fumbling with their spears, eyes wide. Another dragon, Silveria, flapped behind her sister, exhaling a sudden spout of flame that scorched the snow in front of Bolton's ranks. Steam and melted slush erupted. The Bolton line stumbled back, panic rippling through them. Jon seized the moment. You see, he shouted. We have the advantage here. You cannot stand against dragons. But we don't seek war with you. We seek unity against the White Walkers. If you truly care for the North, lend us your men. Help us defend the wall. Or go back south and leave us be. Bolton's horse pranced nervously, and the man's face had gone pale, though his features were still composed. He glanced at the steaming black patch on the snow, then at the swirling shapes of dragons overhead. For a moment, it seemed he might unleash his men anyway, but cooler calculations must have prevailed. You overreach, boy, he said coldly. But I see you have some bite to your bark. Very well. I will not march my men into Dragonfire. For now. Stannis snorted. Wisest choice you've made so far. Bolton gave him an inscrutable look, then turned back to Jon. I didn't come all this way just to scurry back south. My men and I will remain here a while, see this dead army for ourselves. If it exists, perhaps we'll lend our spears, if we deem the threat real. Jon clenched his jaw. Having Bolton and his soldiers near Castle Black was not ideal, but it might be marginally better than open conflict. Fine, he said. But know this, if you threaten the Night's Watch or attempt to harm the free folk under our protection, my dragons will turn you to ash. A faint flicker in Bolton's eyes betrayed a tinge of anger, but he inclined his head. Understood, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Let us hope it doesn't come to that. The night is cold enough without adding Dragonfire to it. They parted ways. Bolton's men set up a camp on a rocky rise some distance from the fortress, claiming it was best not to mingle. Jon could see lines of tents forming, soldiers patrolling. The tension was palpable. Stannis wanted to ride out and crush them before they became a threat, but Jon convinced him not to. Dragons or no, a fight with Bolton's well-trained men would cost too many lives, and they couldn't afford such a loss before the White Walkers returned. In the days that followed, the uneasy standoff continued. Bolton occasionally sent men to inspect the wildling camps, making notes of numbers and dispositions, no doubt to gauge how easily they might be subjugated. Tormund and other wildling leaders bristled at the intrusion, bearing steel whenever Bolton's soldiers got too close. But Jon and Mance managed to keep bloodshed from erupting. Meanwhile, the Black brothers were caught in the middle, resentful that the Warden of the North seemed to think he had authority over the Watch. Jeor Mormont walked a tightrope, attempting to maintain neutrality. The dragons were the biggest deterrent to outright violence. Whenever tensions ran high, Jon simply had Nymerean or one of the others take a short flight overhead, roaring. Bolton's men had no defense against that, and they knew it. The visitors had brought some large crossbows, but they had never tested them against a real dragon. Likely, they hoped to avoid finding out if the weapons would suffice. As the standoff dragged on, scouts and rangers returned with dire warnings. The White Walkers seemed to be amassing an even larger force. Some watchers claimed to have seen them further east, near the Fist of the First Men, though no one was certain. The temperature dropped steadily, nights growing longer. Winter had sunk its claws into the land, and the promise of spring felt remote. One night, as a bitter wind howled around Castle Black, Jon met in secret with Mance, Tormund, Stannis, Jeor Mormont, and the Red Priests in a disused stable that had been converted into a war room. A single lantern glowed, revealing anxious faces and frosted breath. Outside, the wildling watch stood guard to ensure Bolton's men didn't spy on them. They gathered around a crude map of the lands beyond the wall, dotted with the few known landmarks. Tormund tapped a calloused finger on the map. My scouts say the dead are moving in large numbers here. They'll pass east of the Frostfangs, then come straight for the wall. We might have a fortnight before they arrive, maybe less. Stannis's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. Then we have to prepare. We can't face them in open battle on the tundra, or we'll be overwhelmed. We need the high ground, Mance said, and we need to funnel them into choke points. The gate is the largest weakness in the wall. Jeor Mormont grunted. And it's the only place we can force a bottleneck. If they break through, the entire north is at risk. If we hold them, we might stand a chance. Stannis nodded. We should build more barricades beyond the gate, create layered defenses. Use fire, oil, anything that can burn them en masse. The dragons will be our greatest weapon against the White Walkers themselves. Jon nodded in agreement. It's settled then. We fortify as if our lives depend on it, because they do. I want archers on every walkway, caltrops, pits filled with sharpened stakes. We'll do everything we can to slow them so the dragons have time to unleash their fire. Ira's voice was soft but steady. We should also prepare men with dragon glass weapons. We have some, though not nearly enough. Valyrian steel, too, if any can be found. Conventional steel only shatters against the White Walkers. We'll need every advantage. Melisandre and Mazo exchanged a look. The rituals of fire must be performed each night, Melisandre said. The Lord of Light will lend us strength, but we must ask for it. Everyone in this fortress would be wise to pray, no matter which gods they served before. Stannis eyed her, but said nothing. Mance frowned. The free folk aren't keen on kneeling even to a foreign god. But they've seen you burn whites. Maybe that's enough to earn their trust. Tormund spat. I don't trust any god. But I trust my own eyes. You lot to your chanting, I'll have my men sharpen steel. Jeor Mormont allowed himself a hint of a wry grin. We'll do both. As they dispersed, a grim understanding bound them. Allies or not, they were in this together, with the fate of every man, woman, and child in the realm hanging on their success or failure. Rumors that the next horde of White Walkers dwarfed the one they'd faced before weighed on them all. The days that followed were a frenzy. Bolton's soldiers stood aloof from the preparations, claiming they were only observers. Yet they did not interfere as the combined forces of the Night's Watch, Wildlings, and Stannis's men built defenses. Large wooden barricades bristling with spikes rose in front of the wall's gate. Trenches were dug beyond that, lined with sharpened stakes and drenched in pitch. Barricades were placed strategically in narrower passes to channel the undead into killing fields. Huge piles of scrapwood and brush were gathered, soaked in oil, ready to be ignited at a moment's notice. The Red Priests oversaw the construction of massive bonfires behind the barricades. At night, they lit them to keep the gloom at bay, chanting fervently to Lawler. Some men joined the chanting, if only to bolster their courage. Others mocked it quietly, but none could deny that fire was their friend against the cold. Jon moved from site to site, helping where he could. He assisted with the heavier tasks, hauling timbers with wildlings, patrolling the perimeter with Black Brothers. Often, he took to the sky on Dragonback. Nymeria was large enough now to bear him for short flights. Though controlling her was no small feat, she seemed to sense his tension, responding to the slightest shift in his posture. Her roars rattled men on the ground, but they also cheered the sight of their unlikely champion. One evening, as Jon and Nymeria soared over the fortress, he spotted Ramsay Bolton among his father's men. The bastard of Bolton had a reputation for sadism that rivaled the darkest tales south of the Neck. Ramsay gazed up, a sneer twisting his lips, as though daring Jon to attack. Jon felt a surge of loathing. If the man had had any part in the atrocities rumored to have befallen Winterfell, he deserved no mercy. But the war against the White Walkers overshadowed personal vendettas, or so Jon tried to tell himself. Even so, he resolved to keep an eye on the Boltons. He would not allow them to sabotage the fragile coalition from within. 2 nights before the scouted deadline, a raven arrived from a ranger outpost, battered by the wind and half dead. The scroll inside was nearly illegible, scratched in trembling haste. "They come by thousands. Dawn." A hush fell over those who read it. Jon took the scroll to Stannis, Jeor Mormont, and Mance. The White Walkers were almost upon them. Preparations escalated into a final, desperate push. Men hammered stakes in the dark, cursing as they bruised their hands. Others carried barrels of pitch or hammered iron rings to hold torches. Dragons roared overhead, restless and sensing the tension. By the time dawn broke, a hush had settled across the encampment, a quiet dread as every soul realized that this day, or perhaps the next, could be their last. Stannis' knights assembled in neat lines. The Night's Watch stood with crossbows on the battlements, black cloaks fluttering. Wildlings crouched behind barricades, axes and spears at the ready. The Red Priest circled the base of the wall, chanting softly, braziers smoking. Melisandre and Mazo stood at the forefront, eyes closed, arms lifted in supplication. Ira paced near Jon, staff in hand, her knuckles white around the carved wood. Jeor Mormont moved with stoic resolve, giving quiet orders to his men. Mance Rayder stood among his wildling chieftains, bow across his back, a sword at his side. Tormund Giantbane flexed his massive hands, glancing anxiously up at the swirling sky. And Bolton's men? They had formed up to one side, expressionless, uncertain whether to fight or simply watch. Jon walked along the ranks, exchanging nods with men whose names he knew. Gren, with a bandaged hand, Ed, leaning on a spear despite a limp. He gave them what encouragement he could. "Remember," he said, "fire is their weakness. Keep your torches lit, your arrows ablaze. And if you see one of the White Walkers, don't try to take it alone unless you have dragonglass or Valyrian steel. Call for help. We fight as one, or we die." The hours stretched. The sky remained overcast, a bleak shroud. Men took small sips from canteens, eyes darting to the horizon. Some prayed under their breath, others simply stared in stoic silence. Then, as midday crept in with no sign of an attack, hope flickered that the scouting report had been wrong. But as the sun dipped behind a bank of gray clouds, a horn blasted from the watchtower atop the wall. Another. Then another. 3 blasts, White Walkers. Jon looked north. A dark mass moved across the snowy plains, blotting out the whiteness in an ever-growing tide. Thousands of shapes shambled, marched, crawled. Some were once men, others beasts, all reanimated by the cold, necromantic power of the Great Other. At the fringes, tall, slender figures on undead horses guided them, White Walkers clad in glittering armor of ice. Their eyes burned with an eerie blue luminescence. The watchers on the wall shouted alarms, and a dreadful hush fell over the defenders. Mazo and Melisandre raised their voices in an ancient incantation. Braziers burst into flame, bright as miniature suns in the gloom. The men along the battlements lit arrow after arrow, knocked them in place. Others readied scorpions rigged with flaming bolts. Jon turned, scanning for his dragons. Nymerian, Valerian, and Silveria soared overhead, the tips of their wings tinted orange by the torchlight beneath them. They roared in challenge at the approaching horde. The White Walkers drew closer, the unending waves of whites dragging themselves forward, armed with whatever scraps of weapons they held in lifeless hands. The defenders braced, hearts pounding. Stannis' knights formed a line of steel behind the trenches. Wildlings crouched behind sharpened stakes, brandishing torches. The watch stood ready with crossbows and flaming pitch. Jon exhaled a ragged breath, raised his sword Lightbringer, already faintly glowing with a dull orange hue in the presence of the supernatural cold. A single White Walker broke from the ranks, riding a horse that looked more bone than flesh. It raised a lance of ice high into the air, as if signaling the horde. Then the dreadful sound of thousands of throats moaning in unison filled the air, like a discordant choir from the depths of hell. The whites lunged forward at a faster pace, a swarm of dead flesh, unstoppable, unfeeling. The war for the living had begun in earnest. "Archers!" Jeor Mormont roared. "Loose!" A volley of flaming arrows arced into the sky, painting trails of light against the gray clouds. They rained down upon the leading ranks of whites, igniting old rags and decaying flesh. Screeches and hisses erupted as some of the dead crumpled, thrashing in the flames. But more kept coming, clambering over the burning bodies. Pitch was poured into the trenches, then lit with blazing torches. Great whooshes of flame shot up, forming a barrier of searing heat. The first line of whites hurled themselves into the fire, flailing as they blackened. Yet the ones behind simply piled on, forming a grotesque ramp of corpses that started to smother the flames. In the sky, the dragons began their onslaught. Nymerian dove, unleashing a torrent of fire that carved a swath through the horde, leaving smoking craters behind. Valerian and Silveria followed suit, their combined fury setting hundreds of whites ablaze. The defenders cheered at the sight, hearts rising with each new burst of dragon flame. Yet the White Walkers themselves stood further back, seemingly unperturbed. Their icy presence spread like a chill wind, and whenever a section of the White Horde faltered, the White Walkers raised spears or swords of ice, and more whites surged forward. The swarm reached the trenches, some stumbling into the blazing pits, others climbing over the smoldering bodies of those who had gone before. Men thrust spears over the barricades, skewering whites. Wildlings hacked with axes, roaring curses. Flaming arrows poured down from the battlements, and pitch-laden boulders were hurled from crude catapults. It was chaos, screaming, flames, the stench of burning rot. Jon found himself in the thick of it, Lightbringer flashing with an orange glow each time he slashed at a white. The sword's flames flared each time it bit undead flesh, vaporizing it in a burst of sparks. Still, for every white that fell, 5 more took its place. Somewhere on the front lines, Tormund bellowed, swinging a massive warhammer, smashing whites like brittle dolls. Stannis fought with disciplined ferocity, leading a wedge of knights to cut down a cluster of undead that had nearly breached a barricade. Mazo and Ira hurled fire from their staffs, bursts of heat that immolated swaths of attackers. Melisandre stood atop a makeshift platform, chanting in a booming voice, her eyes fixed on the White Walkers who watched from behind the lines with glowing malice. Amid the chaos, a thunderous crack resounded. One of the White Walkers had hurled a spear of ice at Silveria, who was swooping low to unleash fire on the horde. The spear tore through the membrane of her left wing, causing the white and gold dragon to shriek and tumble, careening into the ground. She hit the snow with a crash, sending up a cloud of ice shards. Soldiers scattered in terror as she thrashed, pinned by her damaged wing. The White Walker that had thrown the spear now advanced on her, brandishing a sword of frozen crystal. Jon felt a jolt of agony through the bond like a dagger in his own side. "No," he roared, breaking from the lines. He scrambled over the barricade, ignoring the shouts of men behind him. Fighting his way through whites that clawed at him, he cut them down with blazing arcs of Lightbringer. Flames spattered across the snow as he drove forward, heart hammering in his chest. In the sky, Nymerian roared in anger, circling, but the White Walkers hurled more ice spears her way, forcing her to veer off. Silveria was struggling to rise, one wing dragging uselessly. The White Walker, tall and gaunt, advanced with icy deliberation, eyes burning blue. Jon rushed to intercept, gripping Lightbringer with both hands. The White Walker swung its sword with terrifying speed. Jon barely parried, sparks of frost and flame spraying. The cold radiating from the creature threatened to numb his bones. He forced himself to recall the heat in his chest, the spark of Lawler's gift. Lightbringer flared brighter, pushing back the chill. The White Walker hissed, adjusting its stance, glancing at Silveria as though considering killing the dragon first. Jon struck. His flaming sword sliced toward the creature's midsection. The White Walker twisted aside with unnatural grace, returning a blow that forced Jon to duck. Frost crackled along the edge of Jon's cloak, the lethal cold licking at his skin. He hissed, calling up every shred of will, remembering that he was Azor Ahai reborn, the living champion of fire. Lightbringer glowed white-hot, spitting embers into the wind. Their blades met again, the clash reverberating in Jon's arms. He saw Silveria out of the corner of his eye, thrashing, trying to right herself, her golden eyes filled with pain. If he couldn't end this quickly, the White Walker would finish them both. Summoning courage, Jon lunged, feinting high before swinging the sword at the walker's legs. The creature moved faster than any human, but Jon's strike caught its left knee, trailing flame that burned into the ice flesh. The walker let out a shriek like ice cracking on a frozen lake, staggering. Jon seized the opening, driving Lightbringer up under its arm. For an instant, The walker's body erupted in steam and fracturing ice. Then it shattered, shards glinting in the weak daylight, leaving only a puddle of freezing liquid. Panting, Jon staggered to Silveria, who had managed to half-roll onto her side. Her wounded wing trembled. Blood, dark and viscous, stained the snow, steaming slightly. "Easy, girl," Jon murmured, pressing his hand to her flank. He felt a wave of pain and fear through their bond, but also relief. She recognized him. Another White Walker was approaching from the side, but a sudden blast of flame incinerated it. Valyrian swooped down, roaring, scattering more whites. Jon exhaled shakily. Silveria was gravely wounded, but she was alive. He waved over a group of wildlings carrying torches. "Help me get her back. Form a perimeter." They hastily followed, brandishing fire to keep whites at bay. Together, they managed to coax Silveria into crawling behind the barricades, her head lowered in pain. Mazo and Ira rushed over, chanting prayers to R'hllor. Though healing a dragon was no small feat, Jon gritted his teeth, hardly noticing the blood and sweat that slicked his own skin. He rejoined the front lines. The White Walkers had begun a concerted push, their whites using stacked corpses to cross the trenches. Groups of defenders were being overwhelmed, torn apart by frenzied undead. Screams filled the air, mingled with the snarling hiss of flame. Jon spotted Stannis, locked in combat with a pair of whites that had once been men of the Watch. He rushed to assist, slicing through their rotting bodies. Stannis nodded in grim acknowledgement. Then the shrill wail of horns sounded again. From the north, a fresh wave of undead emerged from a cluster of trees. More than before. Jon's heart sank at the sheer numbers. Could there truly be so many corpses in the north? The ground seemed to move like a living carpet of death, unstoppable. He glimpsed an especially large figure among them, an undead giant, swinging a massive club that smashed through barricades like kindling. Despair threatened. Even with dragons, they might be overwhelmed. "Fall back to the wall," Jeor Mormont bellowed, signaling a tactical retreat. Men began pulling back, layering defense after defense. The undead pressed closer, unstoppable. If the White Walkers had learned from their first failed attack, they might intend to break the gate. Another White Walker advanced, cutting down men with an icy scythe. A wildling chieftain tried to tackle it but was instantly frozen and shattered. Above, Nymerian and Valyrian roared in defiance, unleashing more sheets of fire. They incinerated waves of whites, but the White Walkers responded by hurling spears of ice or simply stepping away to raise new corpses from the ranks of the fallen defenders. For every white destroyed, more rose to replace it. The men of the Watch fought valiantly. Tormund hammered skulls, Mance fired arrows tipped with dragon glass, Stannis hacked at undead with single-minded resolve. But the tide seemed endless. Jon found himself near the main gate. Flaming arrows rained from the ramparts, scorching the ground. The moat around the gate had been turned into a raging fire pit, but the undead kept coming, crawling over each other's charred remains. Bolton's men, finally convinced of the threat, joined the fray from the flank, but it might be too little too late. Their swords and spears could kill whites, but not the White Walkers themselves. Jon's breath heaved in ragged gasps. The cold sank deeper into his bones than ever. Lightbringer pulsed with heat, but his arms were weak from endless sword-swinging. He heard Ira shouting incantations behind him, saw Melisandre's red hair flaring in the wind as she thrust her arms skyward, a swirl of sparks dancing around her. The largest White Walker yet strode forward, flanked by two others. Their frost-laden footprints turned the ground to ice. They raised their blades, pointing at the gate, and a wave of freezing mist swept out. The flames in the moat faltered, flickering. "Now!" Jeor Mormont hollered. Archers at the top of the wall released a barrage of dragonglass-tipped arrows. Many found their mark, shattering whites or striking White Walkers. One White Walker collapsed into shards of ice. But the largest one, seemingly a leader, batted the arrows aside with casual ease. Its stare fixed on Jon as if recognizing the champion of fire. A hiss emanated from its mouth, an unholy sound like wind across a frozen wasteland. Men scattered as it advanced. Jon stood, Lightbringer in trembling hands, battered from the fight, uncertain if he had the strength for another duel. But he braced himself. This was his calling. Azor Ahai reborn. If he failed, the gate would fall, and so would everyone behind it. The creature moved with inhuman grace, each step a crackle of frost. It raised a sword that glinted like diamond under moonlight, though the sky was a murky gray. Jon steadied his breathing, tried to summon the warmth in his chest, the flicker of lawless power. The White Walker lunged. Their blades clashed, ice shrieking against flame, sparks shooting in all directions. Jon cried out, pushing back, but the walker was unbelievably strong. His feet slid on bloody snow, arms straining. For an instant, the glow in Lightbringer dimmed as if the cold threatened to snuff out its fire. The walker's face twisted in malevolent triumph. It forced Jon to one knee, pressing closer. Icy shards formed along Jon's gloves, stinging his skin. He grimaced in pain, feeling as though he might be frozen solid at any moment. In desperation, Jon roared, Lawler, calling upon the Lord of Light with every shred of faith he possessed. He thought of Winterfell, of his father, both fathers, of Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, of every life behind him that would perish if he failed. He remembered the Red Priest's teachings, the living flame that had ignited dragons. Somewhere overhead, Nymeria howled, her voice echoing across the battlefield. A surge of intense heat rushed through Jon's body. Lightbringer's dull glow exploded into brilliant incandescence, the sword wreathed in white-hot flame. The White Walker let out a screech, recoiling as the fire licked at its icy form. Seizing the opening, Jon rose from his knee and swung with all his might. The flaming blade cut through the walker's chest, splitting it from shoulder to hip in a spray of steam and crackling ice. The creature shattered, fragments scattering across the snow. A hush fell, only for a heartbeat. The wights near Jon paused in confusion. Then, as if directed by another unseen force, they surged again. But they had lost one of their leaders. Across the field, men rallied, pressing forward in renewed hope. Arrows flew, swords flashed, and the dragons breathed columns of fire that scorched the earth black. Jon could hardly breathe, sweat freezing on his brow as he turned to face the next wave. One White Walker remained, standing at the center of the battlefield, its eyes fixed on Jon. It lifted a twisted spear of ice. Around it, the dead advanced in a shambling mass. At that moment, from behind the lines, came a new sound, the thunderous pounding of hooves. Jon glanced back, expecting a cavalry charge from the wildlings or maybe Bolton's men. Instead, he saw them, a line of riders streaming from the Bolton camp, but they weren't heading for the Whites. They were aiming for the flank of the Allied forces. Ramsay Bolton rode at their head, a maniacal grin on his face, leading a force of knights that crashed into the rearmost ranks of Night's Watch and wildling defenders. Screams erupted as men were cut down from behind. Jon's heart lurched. Betrayal. The Boltons had chosen this moment to strike. Perhaps they intended to let the White Walkers soften the defenders, then move in to claim the aftermath. Or perhaps Ramsay simply reveled in cruelty. Stannis, who had been engaged in combat nearby, spun at the commotion. Treason, he bellowed, his voice raw with fury. The line of defenders began to buckle under this two-front assault, the dead in front, the Boltons behind. Some of Bolton's men attacked the Whites as well, but the effect was catastrophic confusion. Fire lines were disrupted, men turned on each other, and the Whites seized the chaos to surge forward. Tormund cursed violently, rallying wildlings to hold the line. Mance Rayder loosed arrows at the Bolton riders, aiming for Ramsay, but the bastard of Bolton weaved like a madman, sword hacking down a wildling woman who rushed him with a spear. Jon spat blood, dread pulsing in his temples. "They're dooming us all," he shouted to no one in particular. The next wave of Whites hammered the barricade, tearing it down. Undead hands grasped at men, dragging them into the snow, ripping flesh. The defenses threatened to collapse altogether. "Pull back!" Jeor Mormont roared. "To the gate, close ranks." It was all they could do to retreat behind the last line of defense. Men fell in droves. The shrieks of the dying filled the air. Jon slashed desperately at Whites, side by side with Ira, who hurled flames from her staff. Mazo tried to focus fire on the Bolton cavalry, but they were scattered among the defenders now, sowing havoc. Stannis and his knights fought in vain to contain the treachery. Then the largest White of all, the giant, pounded toward the gate, club raised high. If that giant broke the gate, the fortress would be lost. The White Walkers would pour in. Everyone would die or rise again as Whites. Jon's dragons could perhaps escape, but the living would be consumed. Lightbringer flared in his grasp as if urging him to stand firm. He rushed forward to meet the giant, ignoring the terror that twisted his gut. The monstrous White roared, swinging its club. Jon dove aside, feeling the ground tremble. He hacked at the giant's ankle. The blade severed tendon and rotted flesh, flames searing. The giant stumbled, howling in mindless rage. Before the creature could recover, a roar split the sky. Nymerian streaked down from above, jaws wide. She spewed a torrent of dragon fire that engulfed the giant's head and shoulders. The stench of burning decay wafted up. The giant toppled, thrashing blindly. Jon darted aside, narrowly avoiding a sweeping arm the size of a tree trunk. With the giant pinned by dragon fire, Jon lunged, plunging Lightbringer into its chest. The undead flesh crackled and split, spewing black smoke. Slowly, the giant went still. But the victory was overshadowed by the chaos raging across the battlefield. Ramsay's cavalry had opened a breach in the defenders' flank. Whites poured through and more White Walkers advanced. Among them, the final White Walker champion raised its spear. The temperature plummeted. The very air seemed to freeze. Jon's breath crystallized. Soldiers collapsed, strangled by the cold. Even the fires in the trenches flickered and dimmed. With each step the walker took, a ring of frost spread outward. If it reached the gate with that dreadful aura, it might freeze the gates shut or shatter them with a single blow. Jon felt dread coil in his gut. He had already spent so much of his energy. Lightbringer's heat flickered in his grasp. How many times could he duel these nightmares? Then, out of the swirling snow, a new figure emerged from behind the White Walker lines. At first, Jon thought it was another walker, but it wasn't. A tall woman with pale hair, or was that an illusion of the wind? She was robed in black and red, and behind her strode three creatures that might have been, no, impossible. Were they more dragons? No, they were men, armored warriors, each with a banner that bore the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. The woman raised her hand and flames danced along her fingertips. Jon realized with shock that she must be Daenerys Targaryen, his father's sister. The rumors were that she had dragons had marched on Westeros from the east. He had never dared to hope she might come north. She was not alone. A swirl of her own dragons burst through the storm clouds above. The watchers on the wall gawked as enormous silhouettes breathed flame that crashed into the White Walker's flank. The undead reeled under this sudden assault from behind. Jon's heart soared. If Daenerys was here, with her dragons, they might yet turn the tide. Roars of draconic fury echoed across the battlefield. The newly arrived dragons were larger than Jon's trio. They must have had years more growth. Their flames tore open wide swaths of undead. Even the White Walker champion faltered under the barrage. Daenerys advanced with her retinue, and at her side, to Jon's utter astonishment, stood Ser Jorah Mormont wearing hardened leather studded with steel. The Mormont sigil on his arm was faint but visible. They fought their way through the mass of whites, forging a path straight toward the White Walker champion. Jon wasted no time. He seized the distraction, rallying any men still standing. Push forward. Now. The defenders surged. Stannis and Mance set aside their mutual distrust to lead a combined charge against the undead. Ramsay, seeing the massive dragons behind the horde, began to pull his cavalry back, evidently realizing he wanted no part of that. Even Roose Bolton's stoic face showed alarm from his vantage on the ridge. With Daenerys's dragons scorching the rear ranks of the undead, Nymerian and Valyrian joined the fray from the front. The White Walkers tried to retaliate, but there were too many dragons now, too many flames. The final Walker champion hurled its spear in fury at one of Daenerys's dragons, only to have the beast twist aside and counter with a lethal burst of fire. The White Walker screeched, trying to escape. Jon charged forward, Lightbringer blazing, and struck it from behind. The icy foe shattered into fragments. In that moment, the swirling host of whites seemed to lose cohesion, staggering in confusion. Men and dragons pressed the advantage ruthlessly. A wave of fire crashed upon the undead ranks, scattering them. Thousands were incinerated or beheaded, their corpses littering the field in smoldering piles. Bit by agonizing bit, the living forced the dead back, until at last the White Walkers, or what remained of them, fled into the storm in disarray. The whites that lingered collapsed where they stood, left inert without their master's will. Then, as swiftly as it had begun, the battle ended. A hush fell over the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the moans of the wounded. Bodies, human and undead, covered the snowy ground, some still burning. Dragons circled overhead, their roars diminishing as the last pockets of whites collapsed. Exhausted men slumped on the bloody snow, tears mingling with sweat on grimy faces. Many had lost friends, siblings, lovers in the carnage. In the midst of the wreckage, Daenerys Targaryen stepped forward, flanked by Ser Jorah and a handful of Unsullied. She was older than Jon had imagined, yet still regal. Her pale hair was braided, her eyes fierce. She regarded Jon with an expression that carried both relief and curiosity. Jon bowed his head, trying to catch his breath. His limbs felt like lead, and Lightbringer's flame had almost guttered out, leaving only a faint glow. Nymerian landed behind him, stirring up a gale of wind with her wings. Daenerys's largest dragon, a black behemoth with streaks of red, settled behind her. So, Daenerys said softly, voice carrying in the hush. You're the one they call Azor Ahai. Jon nodded slowly, meeting her gaze. And you're Daenerys Stormborn, the mother of dragons. She glanced at the battlefield, at the many dragons perched among the ruins. It seems we share more than blood, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I came north when my advisors heard rumors of White Walkers and a Targaryen champion defending the wall. My dragons and I have seen many horrors, but none like this. Jon released a slow breath, relief flooding him. With Daenerys' arrival, the war might yet be won. You came just in time, he said, voice trembling. I owe you my thanks. We all do. Daenerys inclined her head. And I owe you my own gratitude. Without your stand here, the dead might have rolled over the north unopposed. We have much to discuss, nephew. She smiled faintly at the word, acknowledging the truth of Jon's parentage. Stannis approached, face grimy with soot but grudgingly grateful. Daenerys Targaryen, he said. I never expected to see you riding to the wall's defense. She lifted her chin. I never expected to find so many in Westeros who had the courage to stand against the dead. I came to claim my birthright, but it seems we all must unite if we're to survive the long night. Tormund let out a hearty laugh, albeit ragged. More kneelers, more dragons. Well, we beat back the monsters at least for now. Meanwhile, the Bolton's treachery had cost many lives, but Roose Bolton and Ramsay had retreated once the tide turned, riding south. Their tents were abandoned, campfires still smoldering. Jon seethed at the thought of them escaping to sow havoc elsewhere. But at least the immediate threat was neutralized. The living still held the wall. Men began the grim work of tending to the wounded, collecting their dead. Daenerys's forces aided them. Unsullied moved with disciplined precision, helping stack the remains of whites for burning. The dragons circled overhead, vigilant in case any undead stirred. After a brief reprieve, snow began to fall again, a soft hush over the devastation. Jon moved to Silveria, who lay in a sheltered spot behind the gate. Ira and Mazo hovered, attempting to treat the dragon's wounded wing with salves and prayers. Silveria whined pitifully, but she was alive. Gently, Jon placed a hand on her scaled snout. You'll heal, he whispered. We'll take care of you. She blinked slowly, her golden eyes clouded with pain, but she rumbled in recognition. The bond between them pulsed with mutual comfort. Night was falling by the time the battlefield was finally secured. A council gathered in the shattered courtyard of Castle Black: Daenerys, Jon, Stannis, Jeor Mormont, Mance Rayder, Tormund, and the Red Priests. Torches flickered, revealing exhausted but determined faces. Bodies wrapped in cloaks lay in rows, awaiting pyres in the morning. The smell of death was everywhere, but so was the faint hope that they had won a significant victory. There are still White Walkers out there, Jon said wearily. They fled, but they'll return with more whites if we don't take the fight to them eventually. Daenerys nodded. We will. The living must press our advantage. My men will help fortify the wall, and we'll hunt the White Walkers if possible. But we must also secure the realm. The Boltons betrayed us here. They'll try again, perhaps raising a new army. Stannis looked grim. The Lannisters still hold King's Landing, but their power may wane if Daenerys Targaryen truly has come with an army and dragons. The realm is in flux. Jeor Mormont managed a tired smile. We can only focus on one war at a time. For now, the long night has been pushed back. Mazo bowed his head to Jon. Azor Ahai, you have led us to victory here. Your father, both of them, would be proud. The Lord of Light's flame burns brightly in you. Jon stared into the torchlight, remembering the cost of this day. I only hope it was enough, he murmured. The White Walkers are cunning. They'll try to divide us again. We must stand united or we'll fail. His words hung in the cold air. Daenerys placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, her expression somber. Then we stand united, dragon and wolf together, Targaryen and Stark. The living have no choice. In that moment, Jon felt an unexpected flicker of warmth. A sense of belonging, of family. He had lost Robb. He still didn't know the fate of his other siblings. And Ned Stark was long dead. But here stood Daenerys, another Targaryen, offering kinship as well as alliance. Together, they might mend a broken realm and hold back the tide of darkness. And beyond that, who could say? Snow drifted across the courtyard, glowing in the torchlight. Men warmed their hands at the fires. Dragons hissed softly, curling in the shadows. The wind carried the faint scent of hope, mingled with the metallic tang of blood. For the first time since this war began, Jon felt a cautious optimism that dawn might yet break over the realm. The White Walkers had been driven back again, and the rightful queen of Westeros had joined the battle. If they could vanquish the Great Other and banish the Long Night, then perhaps, in time, the land might heal from the wounds of war. Perhaps a new era could be born, forged by fire and blood, but steered by compassion and unity. Jon would see it done. He was Azor Ahai reborn, champion of the Lord of Light, a Stark in his heart and a Targaryen in his blood. Surrounded by unlikely allies and bonded to 3 dragons, he stood on the cusp of a new age. Snow fluttered against his hair, and he closed his eyes for a moment, imagining a future free from the chill of endless winter. The road would be long, paved with more battles, more heartache. But for tonight, the living had prevailed, and that was enough to kindle the embers of hope. In that quiet aftermath, battered and bloody though they were, Jon Snow, Jon Targaryen, allowed himself to believe that they might, at last, save Westeros from the darkness.